one more speaker, but they're not in the first case, so hopefully they should arrive by the time their case comes up. Well, Happy New Year to everyone. I think this is the first Planning Applications Committee of the new year. My name is Councillor Tom Bennett. I'm one of the Vice Chairman of the Planning Applications Committee, and I'll be chairing tonight's committee. To my right are my four fellow councillors, and it'll be the five of us who are making the decisions on the cases this evening. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Wade.
Councillor Wade, Earls Court Ward.
Councillor Ali, Dalgana Ward.
Councillor Maxwell Woodger, Queensgate Ward.
Councillor Wala Idris, Brompton and Handstown Ward.
Excellent, thank you very much. And to my left are the officers who will be assisting us this evening, and the officer team is led tonight by Martin Lomas. We'll start off with any apologies for absence. I can see everyone's here, so I'm sure we don't have any apologies. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Wade, I believe you have a declaration of interest.
Yes, I'm an objector to the third item on the agenda, ground floor 153 Earls Court Road, and I will be speaking against them.
No problem at all. So Councillor Wade will recuse herself from the decision-making of that case, of course. Any other declarations from members of the committee? Councillor Ali?
I have nothing to declare. However, one of the items is for my ward, but I haven't been contacted about it. So, yeah, I'm ready to make that decision when time comes.
Okay, no problem at all. That does happen from time to time. If there are no other declarations, we'll go on to the minutes of the last meeting. That was circulated before the meeting. I think I'm the only person here who is on that committee, so I suppose I should probably take the onus of approving them. Okay. So before we start, I'll just read out the cases that we're hearing tonight in the order that we'll be hearing them. I'll also mention that 103 Lansdowne has been removed from the agenda, so hopefully no one's here tonight who is hoping to speak on or observe the proceedings of that case. So we're going to start with, well, we have two arboreal cases this evening, which is a rare treat for us. So we'll start with 37 Oakley Street, and then 12 St Mary Abbots, then the two southern cases, Earls Court Road, ground floor at 153 Earls Court Road, and 4 Gore Street. Then 19 Brunswick Gardens, 19 Farm Place, 115 High Lever Road, 103 Elgin Crescent, Leighton House Museum, and flats 1 to 45 Bramley House. So as you can see, it's quite a full agenda this evening. If anyone here is speaking for the first time, should be aware that the rules are that both sides get to speak for 3 minutes, and that's per side, not per person. So if there's more than one person speaking, you have to share that time. I need to be relatively strict with that, just because that is the procedure. Where we don't follow the procedure, we can receive challenges. So I'm not being rude. It's just a procedure we have to follow, I'm afraid. So both sides will have the opportunity to speak. Members of the committee will then have the opportunity to ask questions of any of the speakers, any of the registered speakers. We then move on to questions to officers before finally making our decision. So with that, I think we'll proceed to the first case, 37 Oakley Street, and Mr. Morrison, I believe you're presenting that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This proposal is to remove and replace a tree of heaven on the corner of Margaretta Terrace and Feeney Street. I don't know how clearly you can see the pictures behind me, but the tree is in a prominent location, unquestionably. But in August, I noticed that approximately a third of the tree was dead, and so which is not obviously ideal and presents a danger to passing pedestrians and motorists. So we contacted the owner through the land registry, and she very promptly had the diseased parts of the tree removed. We also recommended that she obtained reports on the condition of the tree, which she duly did, and a report from a registered consultant of the Arboricultural Association, and also a climbing inspection was took place, and this revealed the tree to be in very poor condition, and as can be seen from the photographs, there's extensive decay in the canopy, and in fact in one of them it's quite hard to see, but an entire saw, which is about half a metre long, has disappeared down the scaffold branch of the tree. That's the photograph and the top right. So clearly the tree is not in good condition. Understandably, it being a prominent tree and an attractive tree, we received a lot of objections to its removal. However, the majority seemed to suggest that the tree was in good condition, which is not true, and also that the tree would not be replaced, which is also not true. My recommendation for a replacement is a tree called a sweet gum, which is a tough, attractive tree which would attain similar proportions to the existing tree of heaven, and clearly it will take a while to reach the stature of the existing tree, but that is in the nature of the beast. I don't think there's particularly much more to say. I think it's a fairly straightforward matter in my opinion.
Thank you very much. So are we joined this evening by Mr. Cooper? Mr. Cooper? Yes.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
problem
I
at all.
act for...
No, go ahead. I was just going to remind you have 3 minutes, but go ahead when you're ready.
Right. I act for about 11 of the residents, and we've written in to object. We prefer to keep the tree. I mean, to be frank, we're not convinced it is a safety hazard. Stephen Fuller, who is Mr. Morrison's assistant, I presume, wrote to one of my clients and said, I'm not prepared to prepare a report for the tree as it's privately owned and the responsibility of the owner. I sent an email to Mr. Morrison, which he hasn't actually replied to me, asking for actual evidence that the tree is considered to be a safety hazard, because that's what's said. And I have had no reply to that email at all. Having said that, in order to try and reach some sort of sensible compromise, that if you do find on the evidence that it is a safety hazard, and it's supposed to be a safety hazard and not a tree that's not in its best blossom, if I can put it that way, then we would accept a replacement tree, and we would accept a sweet gum, suggested by Mr. Morrison. We would expect it to have 3 meters in height minimum, a girth of 16 centimeters and not 14, but we would accept the sweet gum, providing that there are proper conditions attached to the consent. Now, as you appreciate, this tree is on private land. It's been ignored for years. It hasn't been looked after. It's become a rubbish tip, and dogs and human beings have used it, I'm afraid, as a urinal, which is not very helpful. So we would expect there to be proper conditions attached to it, which don't seem to be with respect in Mr. Morrison's report. First of all, we don't have any confidence, I'm afraid, in any condition being enforced, because there was a fencing condition on this tree in 1988 and nothing happened. The authority, that's your authority, didn't enforce it, and the owner ignored it. So the tree never got fenced, and the area is now open to abuse, as I say, dog waste, rubbish, use as a urinal, etc. We want that to be fenced, and we want it to be properly looked after. And also the replacement tree, I'm pleased that there's going to be a replacement tree, but that replacement tree has to be looked after. Also, it has to have a condition attached to it, which I think Mr. Morrison has suggested, that if it dies within a 5-year period, it's replaced by the owner. We are concerned, of course, that if the owner gets consent this evening and decides to do nothing, nobody knows what's going to happen to this tree. If Mr. Morrison says it's dangerous,
Would you mind wrapping up? Sorry, Mr. Cooper, just we've gone over the 3 minutes.
yeah. Well, the last point I want to make is that we expect a replacement tree to have an automatic tree preservation order on it, sir, because that's what's on it at the moment, and that's lacking as a condition as well. I'm sorry if I've run over my time.
No, not at all. Thank you very much. We don't have an agent or applicant speaking on this tonight, so I'll turn to my colleagues to ask if you have any questions, Mr. Cooper. Yes, Councillor Idris.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. How old is the tree? I think I must have missed it somewhere.
Well, I could probably answer that. It's probably not that old, to be honest. I would estimate it's probably from the 1960s or 50s.
Okay. And you said, Mr. Cooper, you said,
Move your microphone.
yeah, sorry, can you hear me now?
Madam,
Yeah.
we think it could be earlier than that, the early part of the 20th century, but I mean, we don't have any evidence to, you know, it's certainly been there for, you know, over 50 to 60 years, that's for sure.
Okay. And I understand it's a private tree, so the responsibility of looking after it falls on the owner.
Well, that's right, but, you know, I mean, it's not for me to criticise the owner, but the owner doesn't seem to be taking any great interest in the tree or looking after it. It's, she's applied to remove it. She hasn't replied for any replacement tree. Luckily, Mr. Morrison et al. Has suggested, and I hope this committee, if it does grant consent, will impose a condition, obviously, for a replacement tree. But, you know, this is quite an expensive exercise. To cut the tree down and to do it properly, I'm told, is about £8,000. The replacement tree and to look after it is obviously another serious number. And I just question whether any private individual who's not living there, is actually going to do anything, because they haven't done it in the past. I mean, preferably, we would like to take the tree ourselves, but we don't seem to be getting anywhere with that. The local authority, yourselves, don't want the tree and the responsibility of it. I understand that. Why would you? On the other hand, we don't want it going on as it is at the moment. I mean, Feeney Street and Margaretta Terrace and Oakley Street are pretty pleasant areas to actually be in. And the tree could have been a very pleasant attribute to that area. And frankly, it's not. It's neglected. Could I make one last point? You know, Mr. Morrison says, well, this tree of heaven is not a nice species, and they're all a bit dangerous, etc. And I'm perfectly prepared to bow to his better knowledge. But having said that, the trees of heaven all over the borough, and as far as I know, they're not all certified as being safety hazards. I mean, it's quite a dangerous concept, this, because, you know, to pull down a TPO tree, you have to have a good reason for doing it, and the main reason is that it is a safety hazard. We've just got no evidence at all to support it.
In your presentation, you said you're representing 11 residents? You're speaking on behalf of 11 residents or 11
Yeah, I'm
people in the
speaking
area?
on behalf of about 11 of them. I think we wrote in I'm a solicitor, and I wrote in a letter. I'm also a co-owner of number 2 Feeney Street. So I've got dual interest in all this. I act for a load of people in Feeney Street and also in Oakley Street. But there have been a load of other objectors who are not here tonight.
Yeah, I've seen a number of objections.
Yeah.
But my question is, have you spoken to the owner or the person who's supposed to be looking at, have you inquired as
Well,
to...
we've tried, but she doesn't respond.
Okay, I understand.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
Any
you know,
other questions from members of the committee? Okay, but no more questions for Mr. Cooper? No. Oh, yes, Kazim, go ahead.
Not a specific question, probably I will ask a question, but I wanted to know...
Is this for Mr. Cooper, sorry, or...
No,
or...
it's just the objector.
Sorry?
Objector. I wanted to ask them.
Yeah.
We have here about 60 plus people, and I wish to, of course, in a democracy, thank them for taking the time to express their views. But we have to look into the hazard, safety hazard for our residents, and I think that's number one for us. So when did you actually inquire about the safety hazard report to be shared with the residents so that they could either object or support? When did you ask for the report?
Well, as I said, we know the tree is not in its best condition, let me put it that way. But that's quite different with respect than being a safety hazard. There are, as I say, loads of trees of similar nature in the borough, trees of heaven, that you've not decided is a safety hazard. And I think the problem with this, if I may say so, is this, that if you do decide as a matter of fact that it is a safety hazard, and by the way, all the residents that I've dealt with, which is the 11, have been told what's happened. We know that there isn't any actual evidence that it's a safety hazard. We know that it's past its sell-by date, which is why we are prepared to accept a replacement on conditions. But if you say it's a safety hazard, and this owner decides, for whatever reason, not to implement the consent, then you're going to be left with the responsibility yourselves to actually do something about it, because we can't go onto private land, and you do have the right of issuing a safety notice, making sure that it's done, and if she doesn't do it, doing it yourself, and surcharging the owner for failing to remove a safety hazard. But you're opening the door to a very large amount of difficult claims, possibly, if you find it's a safety hazard, unless you're sure that there's evidence. Now, I asked Mr. Morrison, I suppose we're going back 2-3 weeks ago, and I said I should have also asked for the actual evidence that the tree is considered to be a safety, because I don't think Mr. Morrison's actually gone to look at the tree. Stephen Fuller said, I've not prepared a report because it's a private ownership. And, I'm concerned, really, that we're confusing the difference between safety hazard, and a tree that's probably past its sell-by date. This is the problem. Now, I have no idea why the owner has applied to remove the tree, or is prepared to accept a replacement, or is prepared to actually spend the money of actually doing it. And if I may say one last thing on this, there's no method statement at all set down as to how the removal of this tree is going to take place, because, I'm told by my arboriculturalist that it's an actual, the removal methodology must include proper poisoning of the stump, 2 months wait, full removal of the stump, not by grinding out, as this will spread disease, removal of the poison or poisoned and accessible roots, suggests 2 meters by 2 meters as 2 meter volume into the new soil. Now, that's an exercise. This is where the £8,000 is coming from. Now, I have no idea, and I don't want to be suggest that this lady who owns it isn't going to actually do it, but, you know, I mean, we've looked at all this and we think it's, you know, a serious 5-figure number to actually take this tree down.
Yeah.
And so, again, I don't really understand the application, but I come back to what I've said, that I'm not convinced it is a safety hazard, but if you're convinced, because Mr. Morrison appears to be convinced without any evidence that I've seen that it's a safety hazard, then so be it. But you must realise there are consequences with all this, and I really, really would be very upset if I didn't find a full set of conditions, you know, enforcing this.
Yeah, I think that's understood, and you've raised a number of important points, and we'll have the opportunity to ask questions of Mr. Morrison. Now, if there are no further questions on that, I'll proceed to questions to Mr. Morrison. Yeah. So, thank you very much. Mr. Morrison, I'll start with a couple of questions. First off, on the replacement of the tree, you have said that we're going to request for a sweet gum to be replaced. Can you just quickly tell us what when we normally make requests for replacement trees, what compliance rates are like, and what the consequences are if a resident doesn't comply with that?
Well, I don't have statistics for the compliance rate, but my understanding is it's perfectly high. And I don't, there's no particular reason to suggest that this applicant won't do it, because when she was alerted to the problems with the tree, she acted immediately, and when she was requested to get reports, she acted immediately. So I don't really see why there should be a particular problem in securing a replacement. And if it isn't planted, we do have the powers to issue a tree replacement notice. And if that is not complied with, we have the powers to go and plant the tree ourselves and charge the owner for the tree. So I don't think there's any particular need for unduly onerous conditions in this case.
And presumably if they don't comply with that charge, then that's an outstanding charge against them by local government, which is presumably something they would certainly want to avoid. In terms of the TPO, because it's a tree in a conservation area, I'm talking about the replacement tree, in order for it to be removed, they would need to seek permission from the local authority, wouldn't they?
Well, this is, they already have, that's why we're here,
Yeah.
because, yeah, so...
But for the replacement one as well?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, well, yes, it's part of the condition is that if it's died, or they can't remove it for 5 years, but they would have to apply in any case, yes.
So it would have a sort of de facto TPO?
A de facto TPO,
Yeah. Okay, that's good to hear. Colleagues, yes, I'll start with Councillor Wade.
Good evening, Mr. Morrison. In fact, I think the last time we spoke was, in fact, about a tree of heaven.
Oh.
And it was about the general root structure and about when a tree gets to be fragile, how vulnerable a tree becomes. And looking at some of the pictures, especially the fourth picture, where you've got that evident break, would indicate this isn't a particularly healthy tree. So presumably, is this, even though this is on private land, it impacts on the highway, and therefore, what risk do you feel that it has to pedestrians or vehicles?
I think there's a very serious risk. If this was owned by us and a street tree, it would have been felled by now.
Because they split very quickly, don't they?
There are big splits in the canopy, there's large areas of rot. It's not a tree that should be standing. It's a hazard to pedestrians and vehicles. It's, as I say, if the tree was ours, it would have been felled by now.
But I think it's a characteristic of a tree of heaven that they're unpredictable, and it could be weather, it could be rain, and they can just split.
Yes, the timber is very brittle. They're very fast growing, and which is generally a recipe for weak woods.
So what reassurance could you give to residents that actually this is a substantial risk to the highway pedestrians, dog walkers and vehicles.
Well, if they read Mr. Hollis's report, that's one thing. It goes into some detail on it. But I mean, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I really, looking at those pictures, it's hard to see how really anyone can suggest that that is a tree which is in good condition. Or the extent of decay is just worrying, frankly. I wouldn't want to sit below that tree for too long, to be perfectly honest.
And what enforcement could we have to ensure that a replacement tree?
Well, as I stated, we can issue if the owner fails to replant the tree, we can issue a tree replacement notice, and if that is not adhered to, we have the power to enter the land and plant the tree ourselves and recharge them.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Woodger.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, obviously the tree is not in a good state, we can see that. Roughly, what would you say is the lifespan of this tree? If, let's say, we refuse this application and we left the tree as it was, how long would it, how long would it last for, roughly?
Well, that's probably not that relevant how long it would live for. It could shed an enormous limb and still live, but as a consequence, it could crush someone at the same time. So it's, the tree could go on for, 10, 20 years even, but it's not. It couldn't go on safely. There's a concept, we call it safe, useful life expectancy, and this tree has reached the end of its safe, useful life expectancy. It could live longer, but not safely.
Apart from the, I think they did talk about the cutting of the diseased parts of the tree away. Is there anything more that can be done to keep this tree in an okay state, an acceptable state? Or is
no, there's nothing that can be done. And I think it's a little unfair to suggest that the owner has somehow neglected it. There's nothing the owner could have done to prevent the state that tree is now in. It's just naturally decayed. So whether it was, I don't know, decay has got in somehow. And so it's taken its toll on the canopy.
Okay. And then, in terms of the sourcing replacement, do we know where this would be sourced from?
Whether we can help the owner find a nursery. I mean, we buy 200 or 300 new street trees a year, so we can help them, point them in the right direction in that regard.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the replacement. Is there a minimum requirement on the replacement, i.e. the height, the width, and all that?
It's usually done by girth. It's the measure, yes. So what I wrote was for a 12, 14 centimetre tree to be planted, which is the same size our street trees go in at. So I think that's not unreasonable and the height of that, it does vary a bit, but it would generally be in the 2.5 to 3 metre mark.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Ali.
With having environmental impact and air pollution in the local area in Kensington and Chelsea in general, I would like to see, of course, it's tree to be prevented on no damage to be done either publicly, health and safety, or the road, or pedestrian or dog walkers. But I want to know, you clearly see this as a health and safety issue, and Mr. Cooper mentioned that he contacted you back about 3 weeks ago about the health and safety report that you see this is it's not safe. Was there any reason why residents could not be shared with, so that they at least know what's happening, and this is for the sake of the safety, for their safety and for the neighbours?
But I think we've made it clear from the very start that this is a safety issue. I don't think there's any secret to that. The report suggests that the tree's decayed. Safety has always been the #1 issue here, the condition of the tree. That really is the sole thing this turns on.
Sorry, my question was not that safety. Yes, I can see what you've said and the report and everything, but was there a reason why the residents have not been shared with that report, so that they are up to date with the health and safety of the tree
They have been shared.
They have been shared with.
The reports have been on the website for
so they knew about some of them.
Time, yeah. And I believe we shared the reports with them as well, so they've been able to see them.
So some of the residents may have seen and may not have seen some
They
of
said
them.
that, in fact, Mr. Cooper refers to it in his letter, the reports, so they have seen them, yeah.
No further questions. Thank you, Chair.
Perhaps, once we move to the next section, we can't go back and take comments or questions from objectors or applicants.
We never saw the report.
I'm sorry. I am sorry. I know it sounds very rude, but we can't do it for procedural reasons, I'm afraid. I was going to say perhaps we could also, just as an informative to the decision here tonight, draw attention to that report for residents. Just for residents that haven't had the chance to see it yet, that would perhaps bring it to their attention. I had one more question. In terms of the current planting season, which I'm out of my depth here, but I think finishes in March sometime, is it feasible to get the tree removed and replanted in this planting season?
Probably, yeah. The tree represents less of a risk in winter because it doesn't have any leaves, obviously wind resistance. So we say that the current planting season finishes on 31st of March. So provided the tree is felled and the stump ground out by mid-March, there shouldn't be a particular reason why it shouldn't be done in this season.
Okay, well, I think perhaps I'd be reluctant to add a condition on that just because we don't know availability of tree surgeons, etc. But perhaps we can add another informative if we are to grant permission tonight to strongly encourage the owner of the tree to remove and replant during this planting season. Any other questions? No, in which case we need to proceed to a decision. Is this just a grant, not grant, like a normal case? Haven't done an arboreal case before? Yes, okay. So the recommendation is to grant with those two informatives I just mentioned. Yep. So start with... Yeah, sorry. Yeah. There's another condition.
Sorry, there is a condition attached to that.
Okay. So with the conditions attached, plus the additional informative just mentioned, the recommendation is to grant. Councillor Wade, in favour. Councillor Ali? In favour. Councillor Woodger?
Reluctantly in favour.
In favour. Councillor Idris?
Now that we have the two informatives and we can guarantee a tree before the end of this season, yes, in favour.
Okay. Well, just to be completely clear, we can't guarantee, but we strongly encourage a tree before
Well, is there anything stronger than encourage? I mean, we need, I would like to see with trees a replacement as opposed to just...
Well, I think strongly encourage is the best we can do, just because any condition has to be enforceable, and we don't know what the availability is of tree surgeons, and so I would love to, but I think strongly encourage is probably the best we can do in this circumstance.
Okay.
Okay. So in
favour of strongly
in
encourage.
favour, and I'm in favour as well. So that's unanimously passed. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Cooper. So we now proceed to 12 St Mary Abbots Terrace, and back over to you, Mr. Morrison.
September, we received a notice to remove the tree in the picture there, which is a Norway maple tree in the front garden of 12 St Mary Abbots Terrace. The owner has concerns over the proximity of the tree, leaf fall, shading, bird droppings, slippery surfaces, and also the cost of maintaining the tree. Now, we checked our records, and the tree, it's in a conservation area. It hasn't actually been pruned since 2016, so it's understandable that the tree is somewhat overgrown and possibly causing these problems. Prior to that, the tree was pruned regularly on a, say, 3 to 4 year basis, and it seemed to not cause any problems up until now. I think the owner is relatively new and perhaps didn't realise what the responsibilities of tree ownership, what they entailed. So inevitably there will be a cost to that. But on the other hand, the loss of this tree, which is in a very prominent location, it's a significant amenity to the area, and clearly there are environmental benefits to the retention of trees from point of view of air quality and global warming even. So there is no good reason, in my opinion, to fell this tree, and that's why we served the order to prevent its removal.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Morrison? No? No. Well, I think, judging by Mr. Morrison's comments and the report, does seem like an important contributor to the greenery of our borough, and also I think we need to note the point that if we were to not give it a TPO, that would set a precedent for a lot of trees in our borough, which we would be probably rather upset if they disappeared. So in which case I'll move straight to a decision. Recommendation is to grant the TPO. Is that the right way of putting it? Yeah, to grant the TPO. To confirm the TPO. Councillor Wade, in favour. Councillor Ali. Councillor Woodger.
In favour.
Councillor Idris. And I'm in favour. So it's unanimously passed. We now move to 153 Earls Court Road, and Ms. Long, I think you're presenting this one, so over to you.
Thank you and good evening. The application relates to the ground and basement level of 153 Earls Court Road, a building which forms part of a terrace of 7 units within the secondary shopping frontage of the Earls Court District Shopping Centre. The application site is the vacant unit shown on the images here. The application seeks planning permission for the change of use of the basement and ground floor levels of the building from Class E to a sui generis use in order to allow the premises to be used as an adult gaming centre. This slide shows the proposed basement and ground floor levels. No external works are proposed as part of this application, which relates only to the use. The officer recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the recommended conditions in section 8. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have two objectors speaking on this case, Councillor Wade and Amanda Usher. Is Amanda Usher here tonight? Hello. So because Councillor Wade's a local councillor, it's slightly different, and rather than share 3 minutes, Councillor Wade has up to 2 minutes, and then Ms. Usher, you have up to 3 minutes. So, Councillor Wade.
Ms. Usher is going to start first,
Okay,
and I'm going to finish off.
Okay, no problem. When you're ready.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here on behalf of Global Estates, and their objection is based on policy CF3 of the local plan, which requires the percentage of Class A1 shops in the secondary retail frontages to be above 50%. The premises at 153 Earls Court Road are in the secondary retail frontage. The intention of this policy is to protect all shops and shopping floor space at ground floor level in the area in order to maintain and enhance vitality and success of Earls Court Road. The recent update to the use classes is not relevant, as the policy clearly states Class A1 shops. In September 2020, out of 7 premises, only 2 were Class A1 shops. Today, the number of shops remains at 2. Class E was not intended to create one homogeneous class. Class EA refers to shops, whereas Class EB, for example, refers to restaurants. I have walked the streets personally in the area and submitted information showing that it does not comply with policy. At present, the percentage of shops in the relevant secondary retail frontage is 29%. This proposal would bring that down to 14%. The proposal would also mean that there would be 3 non-retail units in a row, again against policy. Point 17 of the planning report states that the percentage of retail would be 57% should the proposal be granted. It is not fully understood how this would be compliant with policy. Whilst the report does cover the makeup of the terrace, even in September 2020, the policy was not being complied with. The report states that the terrace comprised of 2 A1 retail, including the host site, 3 A3 restaurant, 1 A4 public house, and 1 sui generis bookmakers. The terrace currently comprises of 2 sui generis, 3 Class E-B restaurants, 2 Class E shops. The amount of shops on the terrace has therefore not changed and is below 50%. It is submitted that the logical amendment to the policy would be to redline Class A1 as redundant and retain shops. The applicant states at paragraph 6.5 of its planning statement that its proposal does not comply with the policy. The applicant agrees that the policy is not currently being complied with and that this application would worsen the situation. Similarly, the applicant agrees at paragraph 6.5 that this proposal would result in there being more than 3 non-retail uses in a row, contrary to policy CF3. It is not clear on which grounds the word shop in policy CF3 is being disregarded. Consequently, the makeup of the premises remains unchanged and the proposal would bring the percentage of shops down to 14%. The Council's guide states that the applications must be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, which mirrors both the government guidance on the matter and Section 70(2) of the Town and Country Planning Act and Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchases Act. The policy is there to protect retail, and regardless of the new use classes, this application means the loss of a retail unit to a sui generis unit. Due to the policy considerations, I do not agree with the planning officer, nor do I think would a planning inspector. Based on this, the granting of this application would be against policy. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Tonight, this planning committee has an enormous responsibility and can demonstrate planning can be an influencer for positive change and for a better future for Earls Court Road and the Earls Court community. Earls Court Road, like other high streets, has suffered from increased business rates, rents, Brexit, and the pandemic, but uniquely the reduction of footfall as a result of the loss of the Earls Court Exhibition Centre. The High Street is in a transitional stage. It's at a delicate balance, and if it's to survive, it needs to find a new identity in response to future Delancey developments. Essentially, a high street must serve the needs of local residents, and they clearly do not want another gaming shop, which for many would signal further decline. Some residents are saying that they want to leave the area that they've called home for many years. They're tired of sleaze, the tack, they don't feel safe. The committee must therefore make the decision not to set aside borough policies and strategies that support the retention of retail units and be an active agent for improvement. You may see Earls Court Road as a main thoroughfare, but it has great architectural bones, and that's why there is an active shopfront improvement project to support better placemaking, to encourage better shops, to support better business, to support the 15-minute city culture, to revitalise the high street. Granting planning for a gaming shop so close to others would be negative, detrimental, and indicate that this committee is not listening to the many resident and business owners who have objected, people who care about where they live and want to see a change for the better. I do have a condition if you're minded to approve.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wade. So we now move over to the applicant, and we have Mr. Pope and Mr. Hooper here for the applicant. Fantastic. Well, you have up to 5 minutes between you, so whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dennis Pope. I'm a planning director at Lichfields. We are the agents, and I have here beside me Sean Hooper, regional operations director for Luxury Leisure. My purpose here is really to reiterate a number of the points made in the officer's report as follows. First, adult gaming centres are a recognised town centre use and therefore this location of the property on the secondary retail frontage is in fact entirely appropriate in planning policy terms. Secondly, The unit has been vacant nearly now for 2 years in March this year, and despite marketing, there's been no interest from retailers in occupying it at all. At the moment, therefore, it makes no contribution at all to the vitality and viability of this centre. Indeed, arguably, as a vacant unit, it potentially detracts. Over-concentration of uses, particular uses, it is a legitimate planning concern, but it should be noted, in fact, there is only one other adult gaming centre in this centre, and it's not uncommon for our clients to operate alongside other adult gaming centres in other centres across the country, not unusual at all. A concern has been raised in relation to retail policy, and certainly our experience is that many authorities are struggling how to interpret the introduction of Class E in September last year. In our view, it's not unreasonable, the approach that the local authority have undertaken here in relation to policy CF3, in the sense that Class E was introduced to provide greater flexibility across the high street, and therefore to use policy CF3 in the way that's identified in the officer's report is one that I think is pragmatic in terms of how to apply policy, and one which I think would be supported at appeal by an inspector. Survey evidence has also been presented and accepted in the office report that AGCs can contribute to the vitality and viability of centres through linked shopping trips, and this is particularly the case in relation to our clients' operations where we have presented survey evidence. Lastly, a number of concerns have been raised in relation to social well-being and those matters which fall outside of planning. And obviously it's important to note that if planning approval was granted this evening, our clients would need to apply for a licence, a gambling licence, and those matters are typically aired in that forum. I now pass you to Sean Hoover.
Thank you. Briefly to introduce myself, I've worked for Luxury Leisure for 25 years. I'm responsible for 82 venues across the south of the country, including London, and over 800 employees. I'm a divisional committee member at our trade association, BACTA, and I sit on the National Council. A little bit about our company, Luxury Leisure. We're the largest AGC operator in the UK. We have 242 venues across the UK and employ over 2,400 people. We've had a presence on high streets for over 50 years and operate 39 venues in the Greater London area. We take pride in our reputation as market leaders, setting standards in both social responsibility and compliance. Many of our initiatives have been adopted through BACTA and throughout the wider sector. We have never had a licence revoked. We invest in our people. We have developed a bespoke Admiral development programme in conjunction with Blackpool and Fylde College, where our people can learn transferable skills and gain qualifications from GCSE level through to HND undergraduate degrees. And we'll be looking to employ 8 people in Earls Court. Firstly, a little bit about AGCs. I'm sure you all are fully aware what we are, but just in case you're not. Firstly, it's not a betting shop. We don't operate FOBT machines, commonly the scourge of the press over the last few years. We offer a low-stake gaming offer in a safe and friendly environment. We have a mixed customer base, 55% male, 45% female, and it may surprise you to know that our average customer age is 50 to 55 years. Our staff do not sit behind counters, they are on the floor interacting with the customers, and we take protection of children and the vulnerable as an absolute priority. It is a licensing objective and we have to comply with that. All of our staff are thoroughly trained on Think 25, and we have Serve Legal take age verification testing to us regularly. We have an extremely high pass rate of 93%, which is the highest in the gambling sector and very comparable with bookmakers who are 89% alcohol purchases 81% pass rate and tobacco 77%. Our pass rate is 93%. In fact, any fails of age verification tests are taken very seriously, thoroughly investigated, and failure can be considered gross misconduct. Finally, just to clarify, we do not serve alcohol. We are not permitted to serve alcohol. We do not allow anybody to enter who is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues who has questions, I'll start with Councillor Ali.
Thank you. This question is to the applicants. You've mentioned that this is not a betting shop. You're not setting up a betting shop, but then again you referred to gambling industry. So I'm assuming both are the same. If not, you will educate me more about it. Going back in the area, in the report and the objections of the people that have said there are others in the area, and we have to think about the vibrant and the place making of any part of Kensington and Chelsea. We would not want a street full of supermarkets because we have to diversify the income and the area and the well-being of our residents. How would you describe the benefits of the local people will get from your new business you're starting in there?
As was previously stated by my colleague, we do consider ourselves to be a vibrant addition to the high street, as we are up and down the country. I think typically, even in the notes from the council, the statistics state that 48% of our customers also contribute to the local economy, whether that be by visiting local shops, etc. And just to state that, you know, really there isn't a proliferation case here. There is one other AGC in Earls Court. There used to be 3 betting shops, but there are now only 2. So there are only 3 existing gaming premises in the location. So, you know, I certainly wouldn't consider that proliferation.
Yes, well, Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. One is, do you have any shops in the borough?
We don't. Hopefully this will be our first in your borough.
And how many shops? I mean, you said you have about 39 across London. Where is your highest concentration in London?
We really are spread right across. Our recent openings this year have been in Ealing, Stoke Newington, Haringey, Thornton Heath, which is near Croydon, so really spread all across.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Woodger.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for the objector, Amanda. In terms of what sort of consultation was done for this application, did you interact with the applicant at all?
No, I don't believe there was any interaction between any of the objectors, but I do only act for Global Estates.
Okay. I don't know if Councillor Wade would want to comment on any consultation on this application. Were you consulted?
What consultation? I just want to correct something. There are 2 betting shops, but there's also Silver Time. And I think that you have to consider that we do have a high level of vulnerability in the area. We have 28, I think, about 24% social rented housing. We have a lot of social supported housing. We have addiction in the area. And I feel that this is one of the contributory factors as to why so many residents have actually complained. They feel that the area is being eroded. They feel that this is not going to contribute. The betting shops are there, but there was, I think at the beginning of this application, there was 4 and then it's come down to 2, but we still have Silver Time. These are attracting vulnerable people. Vulnerable people on the street create a problem because people just get worried.
Just to come back to the applicant, Do you want to comment at all on the consultation that you did with residents and the community for setting this establishment up? In terms of your application, did you have a consultation?
There was no specific consultation directly with local residents. Your council officers would obviously undertake in the normal consultation procedures. There were various discussions with planning officers, and as a consequence, for example, of some of the concerns in relation to the proposed shopfront alterations, those were withdrawn, and so what you have before you is purely a change of use planning application.
Chair, I don't understand why he
sorry.
didn't approach the Earls Court Business Forum or the Earls Court Society.
Okay.
Sorry, just to finish my questioning. In terms of one thing that's come out in the report as I read it a lot is the phrase, there are no policies restricting the introduction of gambling establishments. As an objector and the local councillor, if you were sitting in my shoes and obviously looking at this, if we were minded to grant potentially, were there conditions you would put in place or you think would be worthwhile?
I think it's really a part of a very active shopfront initiative that two of us have been working on, where we go to shop owners and discuss how they deal with the elevation. It comes back to the architectural integrity of the parade, because we feel that if shop fronts are appropriately designed, that actually it contributes to good business, it attracts good business, and then because we do have a series of empty shops, that if they see a vitality, I mean, we've done Mediterranean kebab, we've talked about 8 different shops and actually changed that design through consultation. And actually it's worked well. And by going back to the archives of 1904, where Earls Court Road was actually designed as a parade, and actually the shop that they have got has actually got the original stall risers at the height, you retain a placemaking. And this is so important if we're supposed to develop an identity when you've actually got Delancey developing their own master plan for Earls Court. If Earls Court Road is going to survive, it's got to develop its own identity. It's got to have a place where people want to stay, where they want to shop, where they want to go into shops. And that is why it is so important that we fight to retain our retail.
There's no...
and also the look of the shops.
Yes, on that, are there any conditions you would want to put on this application?
So that actually the treatment of the frontage, they've actually got, I know it was in the wrong part of the folder, but I took photographs of the plinths where that could be restored, and we could actually go back and try and make the frontage look better.
Very quickly. So, Councillor, could you clarify what the condition would be to engage in
Well, one, they've got to engage, but also that we want to see improvements to the frontage. That restoration, enhance and improve the frontage.
Okay, well, I think that's something we can discuss with officers. I'm very sympathetic to that, but I do wonder whether it's perhaps just a little tangential to an application for change of use.
No, but if you look at the pack, there's some pictures of the original 1904 plinths, and therefore, if they're going to be changing colour, or they're going to be doing something to their frontage to put their own image on, their branding on.
Would the applicant be open to something like that?
Yes, just to come back, Chair and members, obviously the application before you is change of use, and any changes to the shopfront will require a fresh application which will come before you. But my client's sitting next to me, but I suspect would be very happy to have an engagement with officers as to the shopfront alterations that will be supported on this property.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, we'll raise that with officers. it would be great to put a condition on that, but discuss whether it's perhaps too tangential to change of use and whether it could be a condition certainly on changing an application to change a shop front, but perhaps if we can't put a condition we'll put an informative on that at least, but certainly welcome the applicant's statements that they would engage in that process. Yes, Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to the objectors. Either can Councillor Wade can answer, or Amanda Asha can respond to this. Applicants mentioned that they will not just be like any other betting shop. It will bring, employment to the local area, training, and so on. Despite mentioning already 1 or 2 betting shops in the local area, don't you see that local jobs are being created locally and will benefit local people? Amanda, if you can answer that would be appreciated, or Councillor Wade can respond to that. Isn't this a good thing for the local people to get a job and training and the well-being and the prosperity for the local area?
I am primarily instructed to deal with the policy considerations. However, the only point I will make is that I believe it's only been empty since July 2021, so it hasn't actually been marketed to retail for all that long, and obviously any premises coming into a unit will bring employment for the area.
Yes.
I would say...
sorry, 1 second. Are you putting a question to Councillor Wade as well? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Councillor.
My response would be twofold. One, that in my experience, when people say that they're going to employ locally, they very rarely do. And actually, the other thing is you've got to think of this in the context of other businesses wanting to come in to the area, and whether or not this would be a the placement of yet another betting establishment would actually be a disincentive to other businesses.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just ask, going back to Ms. Asha, just very quickly, because I intend to raise this with officers, I just want to make sure my understanding of your policy point was correct, that effectively the policy referred to the number of A1 units within an area or in a row. A1 now doesn't exist, and we have Class E. So your point is that we shouldn't just apply that policy now to Class E, which is what officers are doing. We should apply it to retail within Class E, so shops, basically.
Yes, so obviously Class E is the same as the original, well, not the same as, but Class E as a concept is like Class A as a concept. So Class A1 shops has, in effect, been replaced with Class EA shops.
Yeah, no, understood. And then just very quickly to the applicant, we might not get any agreement on this, but we just heard that it's only been marketed as vacant since July 2021, but you said that you believe it's been vacant for 2 years, is that correct?
No, my understanding is that the lease expired in July of this year, but that it has been marketed for 2 years. I haven't actually got the date the Carphone warehouse closed, but certainly the marketing activity has been nearly 2 years.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions before we move to questions to officers? No. Well, thank you all very much. Yes, colleagues, questions to officers? No. Well, I'll take up one. So, just a point I was just discussing with Ms. Asha, is that a fair summation that the policy refers to A1, and then there's some debate around whether that should now be applied just to E or to shops within E, and why have we decided to apply it just to Class E broadly?
Yeah, so it's correct that policy CF3 just relates specifically to retail, but as we've discussed since September 2020, Class A has replaced the A1 retail units. So we have taken the 57% reference in the report to Class E generally, because obviously we wouldn't need planning permission to interchange between other Class E uses, and we consider that they would attract the same levels of success and vitality as the former Class A1 use.
Okay, and is there a legitimate argument? I can see we've come down on one side of the argument, but is there a legitimate counter-argument that we should apply it to shops within Class E? Has this been tested to our knowledge? Or, I'm trying to understand if there's an argument to be had and we're leaning to one side, or whether this has been fully resolved.
Not to my knowledge that I can confirm this evening, but I think it's just important to say that obviously Class C is now one single group. Yes, it's separated out without that, but there isn't that requirement to secure planning permission to change within, for example, a restaurant or a retail unit or an office or a retail unit. So as it stands now, yes, it does have a retail unit, but it could interchange between any of those. And so they essentially all considered to be having the same contribution to our town centres.
So I suppose the point being that any policy requiring a subdivision within Class E would be almost pointless, because businesses or occupiers can change within Class E freely without permission. So it'd be very hard to try and maintain a policy which subdivided it. Okay, that's understood. Colleagues, any more questions? No? In which case we'll proceed to a decision. I think it is a difficult one. We're lucky enough to have a lot of residents write into us on this. One thing I will note is that many of the concerns raised by residents would probably be better dealt with in licensing. Not necessarily all of them, but many of them probably be better dealt with in licensing, and we're sort of the first step, and the occupiers will have to, if they get planning permission today, will have to go and get a license as well. So that is something we should consider. I did have one more thing, sorry, before we proceed to a decision on timings. Is the current recommended timings 8 a.m. till midnight? Is that right?
Yes, that is the wording within recommended condition 3.
And could you tell us a little bit more about why we decided on those times? What are the other licensed businesses in the area?
So that figure was taken based on a review of the other uses within the immediate terrace and within the wider area. And so, for example, there is already existing use that operates from 7:30 in the morning, and there is a public house that operates until midnight. So on that basis, those hours were recommended.
Okay, so the midnight is sort of the standard time for public houses in the area, is it?
That was taken, the latest operating hour within the terrace. The pub opens at that time, the weekends.
Okay, because I think probably what we'd want to avoid is pubs clearing out and then people moving in for a short time into the gaming centre and therefore loitering, possibly inebriated for a long period of time. But so during the week, do the pubs close earlier?
During the week, the public house is shuts at 11:30 p.m.
Okay, so I'd suggest that we change the times to the close time to mirror the pubs of 11:30 p.m. during the week. Would that be doable?
If the recommendation were to grant and you want to go there, then yes, of course, you could seek to vary that condition to be worded to 11:30 p.m.
Okay, so colleagues agree with that. We change the closing times on the proposed condition to mirror that of the pub nearby. So it comes slightly earlier midweek, closing time. And then opening time, I mean, 8 a.m. seems quite early to me, but that reflects a similar business in the area.
Yes, so for example, the Bookmakers opens 7:30 in the morning, Monday to Friday, Saturday 8 a.m. and Sunday 8:30 a.m.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, in which case I think we should proceed to a decision based on that minor amendment to the opening time condition. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Ali.
Despite what we've talked about and the discussion we had both sides, I think it's a bit confusing, and what we have from Class A1, which is now Class E, and as it says, a retail shop, I would I would be inclined to approve this, so I would say rejecting. It's not beneficial, I think, to the local community. I will reject
Voting
this.
against?
I will vote
Okay.
against this one.
Against, Councillor Ali. Councillor Woodger.
To grant?
Councillor Idris.
I can't see very much benefit in it for the community, and therefore I will reject.
Understood. Well, I'm going to vote in favour of the application, and whilst I have a number of, great deal of sympathy with the objectors and with the points expressed by colleagues, I think probably most of those are best dealt with in licensing. They are very valid concerns, but licensing, I think, is probably the better place for them. So, yeah, as I say, I'll vote in favour, in which case we're tied, and the chair has the casting vote. So the application is granted. Okay. We now move on. Yes, that was included, the change in condition. Thank you very much, everyone, for speaking, who spoke on that case. We now move on to number 4, Gore Street.
Thank you. So the application site comprises a 3-storey residential dwelling located on Gore Street. The site is the building to the left of the arch on the top image and the right of the arch on the bottom image. The application seeks planning permission for a number of external extensions and alterations to the building. At ground floor level, the proposal seeks to replace the rear garage door, in addition to replacement of traditionally detailed windows and doors and the creation of a bin store to the front of the site. At first floor level, replacement windows are also proposed, including a traditionally detailed opening to the master bedroom, which would be obscurely glazed. There is an existing openable obscurely glazed window in this location, as can be seen on the image here on the top left. At second floor level, replacement windows are again proposed, together with new dormer windows to the rear and the provision of a new dormer window to the side elevation associated with the rebuilt mansard extension. The window to the side elevation would be obscurely glazed again, replacing the existing clear glazed and openable roof light shown on the image here. To the main roof, a new roof light is proposed, which would be flush. This slide shows the existing and proposed front elevation of the building, with planning permission sought to replace the openings and to increase the height of the parapet by 0.89 metres to align with the height of the adjoining property at 1220 Elverston Place. On this slide, you can see the existing and proposed rear elevations with the rebuilt mansard and the replacement openings, including those to the garage door. Finally, this slide shows the existing and proposed side elevation, showing the increased parapet height to the front and side elevations. Also shown here is a section of the proposed bin store located to the front of the site. The officer recommendation is to grant planning permission, subject to the recommended conditions in Section 8. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we're joined by 2 objectors, Elizabeth Riak and Roger Whitelock. Are you both with us today? Hello. Well, thank you very much for joining us. You have 3 minutes between you, so please start when you're ready.
Thank you very much. So I have grown up living in 20 Elverston Place and will be speaking today on behalf of majority of the building. Just some context first. So a height increase of a whole story was granted by the previous owner of number 4 Gore Street, was permitted just over 10 years ago with clauses. Number 4 was originally built as an annex to 20 Elverston Place. We can still observe outlines of interconnecting stairs and chimney flues. Our main objection is to any further extension in height to match the level of number 4's front facade cornice with 20 Elverston Place's detailed cornice. Their centre architrave is a metre lower than that of number 20, and their cornice should carry through this detail. Building up against our side wall will obliterate the original Victorian cornice of 20 Elverston Place. We believe details such as this should be conserved. This increase would also make the parapet wall over 1.5 metres, which we think is unnecessary. The front facade of number 4 has original architrave details on a different level, and this detail, which is lower than number 20, should remain as originally intended. Their architect's front elevation, which has been presented to the council, neglects to show any of this, as they have not submitted any of number 20's architectural details whatsoever. Number 4 is also the opening of Petersham Mews and should blend with the Mews streetscape, which of course is at a lower level. On another note, the rear windows facing into the light well shared with 20 and 19 should be remained fixed and obscured glass as stated in the last permission granted to number 4 in May 2000 for privacy and safety reasons. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. I'm Roger Whitelock. I'm going to represent many of the occupants and owners of apartments in number 19, the adjacent building. You have a number of written submissions all expressing concerns about this application, and I won't reiterate the details which are all available to members of the committee. In view of the fact, I'll just concentrate on a few salient points. In view of the fact that the original application requested a roof terrace, and this has been withdrawn, I question why it is still required that the partition and the parapet wall needs to be elevated. In addition, they request a flat roof. This seems to be a worrisome thing. Is there some hidden agenda, and why is a flat roof requested? Surely this is the least efficient type of roofing and the least proper. It is certainly unusual in that area of London. As a medical practitioner, I'd also like to say that I have concerns about the elevation of this parapet. It could easily, to some extent, reduce the circulation of air, which is in an already confined light well at the rear of the building. And we are all fully aware of the need for free circulation of air, especially in times such as we're experiencing at present. May I point out that the planning officer who has submitted the final overview is in part inaccurate. Section 616 states an incorrect information. Number 39 Petersham Place, which is adjoining, it does not open onto number 20. It abuts onto number 19 and was the original mews of the property. There are no openings in the party wall and there are no fenestrations in it. And I think that number 20 should be treated similarly for a question of safety.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there as we have gone a bit over, but there'll be opportunities for all members of the committee to ask you questions afterwards. Thank you very much. So we now go to the applicant, Mr. Sammy. Are you with us this evening? So, I just pressed a button which says do not press. Okay, hopefully we're back. You have, because the previous speakers went to 4 minutes, so I'll give you 4 minutes as well. So whenever you're ready.
Okay. In reply to Ms. Rioch's objections about the side windows, the proposed side windows, there are 2 side windows currently there. Neither of them are of traditional design. One of them has obscure glass, the other one has clear glass. We're proposing to replace both of them with new windows of traditional design with sashes, and we've agreed to have those sashes glazed in translucent glass to preserve primarily our own clients' privacy, but also to prevent any overlooking either from neighboring properties into our client's property, because those 2 rooms, those 2 windows both serve bathrooms. Ms. Rioch also stated that the windows are currently fixed. That's not the case. Both of them are openable. One of them is a center pivoted skylight, a Velux, which we're proposing to replace with a traditional dormer. Second one is a casement window, which we're also proposing to replace with a timber sash window, so that they will both be in keeping with the style of the conservation area. In reply to Dr. Whitelock's objections, First of all, with regard to the flat roof, the reason we're replacing the flat roof is that the current flat roof, it's nominally a flat roof, but it does have a slope from front to back, a significant slope, which means that at one end of the mews, at the mews end of the house, it is about a meter lower than on the front end. Therefore, with a flat ceiling, internally, we've got a low ceiling height. By putting a true flat roof at the current roof level, we will be able to increase the internal ceiling height to a more acceptable and more normal ceiling height, a more conventional ceiling height. With regard to air circulation, we've discussed this with the planning officer because we're perplexed to see how this is affected at all. We're not in any way raising the height of the building at either the rear or on the sides, which faces number 19 and part of the courtyard of number 20 Elveston Place. So I'm perplexed as to how this is going to have any effect, and at any rate, even had we proposed any elevation in height, it's questionable that that would have any effect on air circulation. We're talking about a mews building which is currently 3 stories and it's remaining at 3 stories with no changes to its height on the side. With regard to the comment about the front elevation, as Ms. Rioch correctly stated, the previous owners were granted permission and constructed a 3rd story back in 2000. However, the upper part of the new extension has a large blank area of wall without any decorative detail, and it's out of keeping with the character of the conservation area in general and with the character of the immediate neighbors either in the on Gore Street or in the mews. What we're proposing to do is
Just
at the same
very quickly, if you could wrap up, sorry.
We're increasing the height slightly so that it's aligned in height with the neighboring building to which it's directly attached, and then we're continuing the same cornice detail that's on number 20 Elveston Place across the front of number 4 Gore Street, so as to unify the architectural design of the 2 buildings which are on the left-hand side, on the south side of the archway entrance. So we're actually looking to preserve and enhance the character of the conservation area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now look to colleagues for questions to the applicant or objectors. Yes, Councillor Woodger.
My question is for the objectors. How much consultation was there from the applicant with you? Did you interact with the applicant at all? How much consultation was there on this application? Did you interact with the applicant when they...
I've only met the representative of the applicant tonight. Well, we haven't met, we have come across each other, but there has been no interaction whatsoever, to my knowledge, either with the occupants and owners of number 19, or, I believe, for number 20 Elveston Place, or I know the people in 39 Peacham Place at the rear, and I don't think they have been in contact with them on a personal level.
Okay. And to the applicant, did you make an effort to consult or talk to the neighbours before submitting this?
The neighbour who, in our opinion, was most likely to be affected was the neighbour at the back of the house, in, I think it's number 39 Petersham Place. We did contact them, we did discuss with them, and one of the objections they had is initially we had proposed to put an air conditioning condenser unit and a bin storage unit at the rear of the property. In consequence of our consultation with them, which was informal consultation via the client, via the owners, we recommended, and the client accepted, to move both the condenser unit and the bin storage to the front of the area against the against the wall of the against the retaining wall which is against the pavement, so that unless one leans over the railings, you would be virtually unaware of the existing of those structures.
Okay, right, thank you.
Councillor Wade.
I'd like to speak to the architect, if possible. I don't understand the rationale for the height of the parapet wall. I went along to see the streetscape, and it seems to be out of kilter and out of rhythm with the rest of the buildings on either side. I think below where you've got I'm looking at the rear, the ideas for the windows and everything else is fine, alignment, but it's just the height of the parapet wall that does concern me. It just seems to be out of character and context for the area.
I think that I don't know whether it's possible to have the photograph of the front facade. Yes. As you can see, the windows of number 4 Gore Street are, the proportions of the windows are out of character with the proportions of other original windows of buildings in the immediate vicinity. What we proposed to do was, first of all, to increase the height of the parapet slightly so that the top of the parapet would be in line with the top of the parapet of the existing building on the left-hand side, which is number 20 Elverston Place, and then to carry the cornice detail at the top of number 20 Elverston Place across the top of Armuse House. Now, this is not, what I'm proposing here is a characteristic of many archway gatehouses either side of archways leading to muses, both in Kensington and Chelsea and in Westminster. I wrote to the council and gave them several examples of similar situations, and for example the ones that I pointed out were at the junction of Queensgate Place and Queensgate Place Mews, at the junction of Queensgate Place and Petersham Mews, at the junction of Queensgate Place and Elverston Mews, at the junction of Elverston Place and Elverston Mews on both sides of Elverston Place, and also in a very good example was at the entrance of either side of the archway to Kinnan's Mews off Launceston Place. So what we're proposing is a characteristic of Victorian buildings of this type. Now, in this case, the building to the north of the archway, as you can see, has been substantially changed, and it's out of character with the rest of the area. It's taller and larger. So what we felt was that by introducing this slight additional increase, if anything, we were creating a more uniform line between the buildings either side of the arch. But as you can see, the cornice of the arch carries across onto the front of our building, and what we wanted to do is also carry the cornice of number 20 across so that the building would be better tied to the structures to its left and right, so that we would create greater architectural uniformity in that townscape.
But could I just clarify? So the height of the cornice will be equivalent to the height of the building on the right. Is that correct?
No. The height of the building on the left, the existing building, has a cornice.
Okay, and then the parapet will be...
The parapet and that cornice are proposed to be carried across onto the top of our building.
Equivalent to the building on the left,
yes, and
Elverston.
As part of flattening the roof terrace, the existing roof, which steps and slopes, we will be able to increase the window heights on the second floor. As you can see at the moment, they're very low, and they've got a fairly large element of blank wall above them, which is out of character. So this will allow us to increase the window heights so that we get more light into the house, more views out of the house, and better architectural proportions, which will be more in keeping. For example, if you look at the building on the left-hand side, the windows have a vertical proportion, Ours have a horizontal proportion. The building on the left and buildings in the area in general have sash windows, which are vertically aligned. Ours have got casement windows, which are again out of character. We're proposing to replace these with sash windows, which are in character and in keeping with the conservation area and buildings in the immediate vicinity.
Understood. Thank you. Colleagues, any more questions? Yes, Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask in that same picture, the floor beneath the top floor, are they in line with the building next door? Because it's not very clear in the photo. You know, the cornicing, is it in line with the?
No, I would say that the floor level of the top floor is more or less in line with the floor level of the building to the left, but the intermediate level, the first floor level, our floor level is probably higher. Now what we're proposing to do is to lower those windows to create
the illusion of height.
Exactly, by having bringing those as low as possible.
Okay, thank you. And another question to Dr. Whitlock. Can you elaborate on the point you started to tell us about in 6.16?
I reiterate, 6.16 is inaccurate. If you have it, the planning officer states that 39 Peacham Place opens onto the well of number 20. It does not. 39 Peacham Place was originally the mews of number 19. There is a party wall without fenestration, and this was stipulated when number 39 Peacham Place was developed, and this was a condition of the reconstruction of that mews. So there's no fenestration between the party wall of 19 and 39, that's the adjacent mews, and I think a similar should apply to the junction between number 20 and 4 Gore Street. After all, 4 Gore Street was a mews house, and it was a 2-story mews house, never ever part of the streetscape that we see now. It would be quite, in my opinion, incorrect to try to blend it into number 20. This is architecturally improper, in my opinion. Okay. It should remain as a mews house. It was a home for many decades of a descendant of Charles Darwin, who maintained it in a lovely way with a tranquil garden, which has been grubbed up and disappeared. That has all gone without any sensitivity, in my opinion. And I think that this property has been fully developed by the late Mr. Philip Darwin, and it should not be extended further. It will overwhelm the mews house adjacent in the 39 Peacham Place, and will have an adverse architectural impact on 20 Elveston Place. And I think that I would urge the committee to think about this seriously. I think that there has been a significant improvement in this plan as opposed to the original plan, which is in many ways preposterous. But I still think there's a way to go to improve this, and I urge the Council, the committee tonight, to reject the plan as it stands. It needs further consideration, and above all, this extraordinary idea to raise the parapet for no plausible reason whatsoever worries me, and the flat roof is a hidden agenda. So I rest my case, and I think that this is something which the Victorian architects would not applaud if we were to destroy this further. And it's not meant to be part of the grand building of number 20, which was once the home of the Governor of the Bank of England in the 19th century. And we should keep this as a mews house, and it should relate closely to the properties and style of the mews houses along Peacham Place.
Thank you.
That's the way we should run. Thank you.
Very quickly on that, I entirely see your point that it was built as a, let's say, a subservient property. Do you see a counter-argument that due to development which perhaps should not have happened, it is now neither one thing nor the other? It's not really subservient, nor does it maintain a sort of consistent design or roof level. So is there an argument that...
Chairman, I think that's a very fair point. But I think this, the proposals which we have now are going to make matters worse. It's going to make it a disproportionately enlarged property in relation to the grand property on either on 20 Elverston Place. And if anything, we should try to conserve. I think that the late Mr. Darwin added a relatively ugly upper floor, and I think it can be improved. But the present proposals wish to increase the height, and I still think it would be an adverse effect on the tiny light well and air ventilation, which is shared by 3 properties. 2 are multiple occupancy properties, 20 and 19, with a series of flats on each floor. So light and air to this area of paramount importance. So I do not hold that putting a large wall on the east side will not impact on the circulation of air. So purely for health and hygiene, we should not be doing this. And the idea of having vertical windows to match number 20 is not in keeping with the style of a mews house. Thank you.
Yeah, understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. This question is to the agent, Mr. Sami. Is there any chance you can tell us about the loss of daylight and sunlight study that will have, this development will have effect on the neighboring areas, and what has been done to mitigate that problem?
We've illustrated in the drawings that we submitted as part of our planning application that the increase of height of the parapet on the front elevation will not have any impact on neighboring properties whatsoever, on the amenities of the neighboring properties whatsoever. The issue which has been raised again by Dr. Whitelock about the effect on the circulation of air is, I think, a red herring. It is not, I mean, we're talking about increasing the parapet height by 80 centimeters from what it is currently, and not at the rear of the property and not on the side which faces the Elverston Place properties. So it'll have zero impact on the circulation of air on those properties. The other point that was mentioned by Dr. Whitelock about, I think the inference is that we should block up 2 existing windows on the side of the property. These are original openings, and they provide daylight, sunlight, and natural ventilation to the 2 rooms at first floor and second floor of the property, and they share that same light well, which also serves number 20 Elverston Place. I can't see why we should be asked to. We're proposing to keep those window openings, but to replace them with windows of a traditional style. It appears that Dr. Whitelock is suggesting that we should block up our windows.
Whatever happens,
I have not said that.
We won't make you block up any windows.
I have not said to block it.
Follow-up
Understood.
question. I have a follow-up question to the objector. Thank you. Now to the objector. Follow-up question was what Mr. Sami said. The times have changed, and we know the development, yes, as you said, it's been a long time ago, and it's well overdue for this to be done, but done in a proper way. What condition would you like, if we were to grant this application, to be added so that the privacy as well as the daylight could be, it's to you, the objector, Dr. Whitelock. Yes, the question is addressed to you. What condition, if we were to grant, will be acceptable to you as a resident who thinks the air ventilation as well as daylight may be affected by the development?
I think in summary, the retention of the existing height of the parapet wall, and this should not be increased. It will be out of style with the Victorian architecture. We do not wish to have I'm not suggesting for one moment that they block up windows at the first floor level. The windows which are discussed, in my opinion, are the windows which are at ground floor level and feed directly into the light well of number 20. And there are no similar fenestrations between Petersham Place and 19 Elveston Place, and the owners of number 20 feel very strongly about this, both for security and privacy. And although this can emit light between the property, it should not be an open fenestration. There's also another detail which appalled me, is a suggestion of a sliding patio door in the front, which seemed to be out of kilter with the Victorian Mews House. And there are many aspects which I think deserve further consideration before this application is granted. And a number of us, you can see there, reservations from all three surrounding properties. I represent at least 4 flat owners. Number 39 Petersham Place have written in, and I think that we have to hold here and reconsider this and make it a more sensitive application which will not offend the neighbours. The chairman brought up an important point. Just one sentence, if I may.
Yes, okay, go ahead.
You should have communicated, perhaps with your neighbours, to avoid this. Had there been more basic understanding of the need to communicate your desires, there would not be a slight confrontation and failure of this application if it does fail. The first application, which is quite...
I'm sorry, the question was just about conditions. So are there any... You suggested one regarding the height of the parapet wall.
Height not to be extended beyond that. I dislike the idea of a sliding patio door in the grubbed-up garden. It used to be a lovely garden with established shrubs. That's been grubbed up and removed. It's now a sort of I presume, an alfresco dining area. That sounds horrendous to have a sliding door there, if I'm correct. I do not think there should be an open way from the ground floor of number 4 Gore Street to number 20, and I'd like Ms. Riak to respond to that. And I do not think that we should be overwhelming and overextending this Mews House. It's not a townhouse, it is a Mews House, and all development should be in keeping with the Mews that goes down. It's called Petersham Place, but the actual end of the Mews, which is part of number 20, is called Gore Street, as it abuts onto it. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Riak, anything you would add to that? Just and that's specifically on the conditions. So we have 2 suggested conditions which we can discuss with officers. Is there anything else you would add?
Yes, so the alcove, I think, was mentioned earlier, the bit, kind of coming out. It is slightly lower than 20 Elveston Place, so it makes sense to keep the parapet wall where it is, slightly lower as well. I thought I'd just address that. But yeah, it'd be good to see actual plans, seeing how you're going to, keep the Victorian styling in style. So yeah, it'd be good to see that, because we haven't seen the actual detail for number 20 has been completely left off. And then with the windows as well, to make sure that they're fixed and with obscured glass for privacy and safety. Those are our conditions for that.
Yeah, understood. And I believe those are, our officers have recommended those, that last condition that you mentioned on fixed windows that are obscured, but I will double check. Colleagues, should we move to questions to officers? Thank you all very much for your time. We move now to questions for officers. Yes, Councillor Woodger.
I think I probably know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. Could we keep the height of the parapet wall, or would that fundamentally change the application?
The application before you today is to raise the height by that 0.89 metres. So I think to remove that from the scheme would change the nature of the proposal.
Yep.
So I think if you found that objectionable, then it would be refusal rather than conditioning or changing it.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you mind quickly putting up a picture again of the wall in question? I think that would just be helpful. What's the next slide? Sorry. No, okay, we'll go back to the previous one. So just following on from the questions raised by objectors, so I know often we do say when a building is subservient, it should remain subservient. Is it the view of officers in this case that the building is no longer subservient, that's why it's appropriate to raise the parapet wall to match the neighbouring property?
So the building obviously has previously been subject to an additional storey. The proposal is to align it with the number 20, not to go any further than that, higher than that, sorry. So I think the building would remain subordinate to the larger terraces either side. Again, it wouldn't be any higher than the property on the right that you see, and I think it would remain, with a modest increase in the parapet height, still a building which would preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area.
Colleagues, do you have further questions on that? Yes, Councillor Idris.
My question is the same question I asked earlier. It seems we want to make it at the top leveled, but the lower floor is not leveled with the other building, so it doesn't make sense to me. It seems like we're running to make it leveled, but it's not going to be equal or the same. It has its own character, its own identity, and for some reason we're trying to make it higher on one end to make it look the same, but when you look at it, it doesn't look the same because the other floor is a different level.
I don't think from officer's point of view the idea is to replicate. Obviously there are still different buildings, different styles. I think it's just a modest increase in height is proposed. The openings that you see are proposed to, at the top floor level, are proposed to be changed in form as well, so that there would be a better relationship between the height of the building. They are still two distinct buildings, and yes, it is an increase in height, but it's not trying to replicate what is next door.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No, I'll just ask one last one on sunlight. As I understand it, officers agree with the applicant on this, that the parapet would not reduce the amount of light coming into the light well or not make a meaningful difference.
Yes, that's correct. I think, that, again, it's important to say that the increase in parapet height, so the front and the side elevation away from the light well, and the actual height of the rebuilt mansard would be marginally, if it's any increase at all in height, would be similar to what there's existing. So officers consider there wouldn't be any material loss of light.
Thank you. And just very quickly on the conditions around obscured glazing and fixed windows, could you summarise quickly what the recommended conditions are there, because that was raised by objectors?
As currently worded, condition 9 is recommended for the first and second floor side-facing windows to be obscurely glazed. As it's currently worded, there is no requirement for them to be fixed shut. The reason for that was that as it currently stands, those openings are currently openable, so there wouldn't be no worsening of the situation at the site.
I understand. Colleagues, anything else? No? Okay, in which case, or any other recommended conditions? No. In which case we'll proceed to a decision. I think it is a difficult one, and I have sympathies with residents on the sort of journey this building has taken over the years. Doesn't seem to really have architectural logic as far as I can see as it stands now. One consequence of that you might conclude is therefore if there's not currently architectural logic, do these changes make it worse? Does it make this, it might not make it better, but does it make the situation worse? I personally am not convinced that it does make the situation worse, and unfortunately we can't go back in time and change what was done beforehand, but that's for each of us to decide. So the recommendation is to grant. Councillor Wade.
I would refuse and ask that the architect go back and consult. I think the loss of this building more reflected the Mews vernacular than it did the building adjacent. And I think that what we're proud of in Kensington and Chelsea is our mews. I'm not saying that the building's perfect, but I think that a revision could improve it, but actually trying to make something that it's not is inappropriate.
Against? Yeah. Councillor Ali.
I understand and I share with you this is difficult, and looking back, this property and the application grant that has received back in 2000, and with the conditions that we have been talking about and what's been attached in condition 8, I think I will grant this one. I will approve. Yeah, in favour.
In favour. Councillor Woodger.
It's fairly marginal, but in favour.
Councillor Idris.
Actually, I would refuse on grounds that it is trying very hard to be something it is not. And I think it needs to go back to the drawing board and start getting its own identity.
And it is indeed a finely balanced one. I'm going to vote in favour of the proposal for the reasons I mentioned earlier, in which case it's 3-2, so the application is granted. I thank everyone, particularly the residents, for their time. Right, we now move on to, so that's all the southern cases completed, I think. So we now move on to Mr. Taylor with 19 Brunswick Gardens. Sorry, we're going to just take a brief pause. Yeah, if anyone needs to use the lavatory, now would be a good time to do it. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes. So, well, 7 minutes at 8:30. Okay. Okay, we'll reconvene. Sorry to interrupt you, Max. Everyone's back, so reconvene, otherwise it's going to be a long night in any case, so might as well get moving. So 19 Brunswick Gardens, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. So for the first slide, I just thought I'd remind everyone of the Ordnance Survey plan and relationship between number 19 Brunswick Gardens, the application property that you see there in the red outline, and the rears of 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 Berkeley Gardens. As you'll have seen from the history of applications already on the site, the sort of key sensitivity is the relationship between number 19 and the properties to its north on Berkeley Gardens. The application property in that aerial shot is identified by the red star, and you can see 4, 5, 6 and 7 Berkeley Gardens on the left-hand side of that aerial image. You'll see to the left of the application property that there's a shadow which is cast by the application property. And that sort of just illustrates, I think, the sort of sensitivity and the juxtaposition between the two building lines. That's the rear elevation as existing at number 19, and that's the rear elevation as proposed at number 19. You'll see there with the existing rear elevation that there's a sort of central extension that you can see with a recessed area to its left and to its right. And then you'll see that there's a sloping roof above the centralized extension. And then in the proposed rear elevation, you see that there are glazed doors proposed at lower ground floor level and Juliet balconies at ground floor level. And then if you look at the top of the centralized or the central extension, you can see that that's been squared off and a matching cornice installed to tie in with the rest of the building. That image there, I thought I'd just include it to illustrate the difference between this and the previously refused application that you'll have read about in the history. That the key difference is that the recent refusal actually included an extension to be built into the recess on the left-hand side. You can see there in the left-hand side image, there's an extension at the left of that image. And then the image on the right-hand side of that side shows that that's just left as a recess now. There's no extension built into that. And that's the side elevation as existing. The recessed area that is not infilled in this application is to the right of that. And you'll see there in section the sloping roof to the central rear extension that I've already referred to. And then that's the proposed side elevation, which basically shows you that the recess to the right has not been filled in, and then the rear extension has just been squared off at the top with the matching corners. That's the proposed roof plan, and that's the existing front elevation. The left-hand image there basically shows you the street level image, and then the right-hand image there shows the existing front elevation with the front part cut out, so you can see the lower ground floor as existing. And that's the proposed street elevation, which, as you can see, doesn't really change from the existing. And then the proposed lower ground floor elevation. You'll have noted that there's a condition recommended to agree a suitable form of glazing to be installed at the lower ground floor on the front. And then that's the existing section. So you'll see there the property has an existing lower ground floor, and you'll note the garden level to the rear. And then that's the proposed section. The red parts there on the slides indicate the parts of the building that would need to be demolished to install the basement and carry out the elevation alterations. And you'll see there that there's a single-storey basement proposed beneath the building, which accords with policy CL7 in relation to basements. And then that's the proposed basement plan, so you can see that there's a games room and 2 gyms and other facilities proposed at the basement level. And that photograph is actually taken from the rear garden to number 7, so numbers 6 and then 5 are over to the right-hand side of that photograph. And you can see that the recessed area where the rear extension was once proposed but is no longer in this application, quite clearly in that photograph. And then that's just a longer shot taken looking along the recesses, the recess in between the two buildings. And that's the rear garden to number 7 that you see there. And that's the last slide, Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we're joined this evening by Nicola Crichton-Brown and Rosalind Graham. You both here? Fantastic. Well, you have 3 minutes between you, so please start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. My name is Rosalind Graham of Solve Planning, and I act on behalf of Mrs Crichton-Brown. I'll focus my comments on 3 points. Amenity. The proposals incorporate French doors and Juliet balconies across the rear elevation at raised ground floor level. These will lead to unacceptable levels of privacy beyond that currently existing at the property. Construction traffic. The local plan states that the construction of new basements has an impact on the quality of life, traffic management and the living conditions of nearby residents and is a material planning consideration. The CTMP submitted with the application does not meet the requirements of the Council's SPD and local plan in this respect. It fails to address and adequately show how construction vehicles will be managed within this constrained setting alongside other developments in the street and in the surrounding area. This development is highly likely to generate a conflict between construction vehicles, other road users and pedestrians, resulting in a dangerous and unsafe environment. Noise, dust and vibration. Part L of Policy CL7 requires that all basement development should ensure construction impacts such as noise, vibration and dust are kept to acceptable levels for the duration of the works. No report has been prepared to show how noise, dust and vibration will be addressed, and it is therefore impossible to consider the full impacts of such a development on the neighbours. The Council's basement SPD emphasises that construction impacts are a material consideration which cannot adequately be dealt with by planning conditions, and that full mitigation measures must be submitted with the planning application to allow the proposed development to be considered in full. The application as submitted doesn't meet with these requirements, given the lack of any assessment on noise, dust and vibration. The response of the planning officer to the objections merely refers to the conditions that will require further work to be done, conflicting with Council's policy and guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we're also joined by George Creamer. Is that right? Yes, hello. You also
Sorry.
have...
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Nicola Crichton-Brown is speaking
My apologies.
as well.
My apologies.
Sorry, it's okay.
You have another minute to go, so yes, please.
Thank you. I'm the owner of number 5 Berkeley Gardens, which from Derek Taylor's first slide you can see is at right angles to Brunswick Gardens, and my garden abuts at right angles directly onto the garden of number 19 Brunswick Gardens. And I'm assuming that as part of this development process there would be a considerable amount of scaffolding and building work going on in the rear garden right next to my garden, and I overlook that on the first floor from my bedroom window, which is a floor-to-ceiling window, so I look directly down into the garden of number 19 Brunswick Gardens, and conversely any builders or people working in that area over a period of time can look directly into my window. But I'm not going to address you on policy, but generally on the adverse impact these sorts of developments have on the surrounding neighbourhood whilst works are in progress. I have lived in the immediate area of Brunswick Gardens for 40 years.
Just let you know, we've reached 3 minutes. I'll give you another 30 seconds, and I'll give the same to the applicant.
So I feel qualified to speak about the negative effect on living standards caused by proposed developments such as this one. Further, I know from consulting many neighbours that I speak for the vast majority of residents when I raise these concerns. We've heard that developments such as this dramatically increase noise and dirt, and this is particularly important now that many of us are working from home, including myself. The noise makes it impossible to concentrate and to hold online meetings. The disruption to parking is also significant in an area where parking is already at a premium.
I'm afraid we're going to have to address other points in the questions section. So as I mentioned, we do have to be relatively strict, so I do apologise. But there will be plenty of time for my colleagues to ask you questions. George Creamer, speaking on behalf of the applicant. You have 3.5 minutes, so please proceed when you're ready.
Hi there, my name is George Creamer. I work for First Plan, and we're the planning consultants who have been working on the project on behalf of the owners of 19 Brunswick Gardens. By way of a background, we've been working to secure permission for the rear and basement works for the past 2 years now, during which time we've done our utmost to satisfy RBKC requirements and do everything that is asked of us. We initially applied for pre-app advice for the works in January 2020, and then following positive feedback, we submitted a formal application in September 2020, which was in front of the council for over a year. During this period, we provided numerous revisions to the supporting documents in order to satisfy neighbour concerns and provided additional detail wherever asked. We reached the stage where the application had full support from RBKC officers and also a recommendation for approval at committee on the 6th of October last year. It was however refused by members as it was deemed the two-storey extension on the northern side of the rear projection would have an unacceptable impact on the daylight enjoyed by the neighbours at 678 Berkeley Gardens. In order to address this sole reason for refusal, our clients have updated the proposals and omitted the two-storey extension from the northern side of the rear extension from the design entirely. This is the only change to the scheme, as the previous application was considered to be acceptable in all other regards. In short, everything that's presented within this application has already been agreed in principle by both RBKC officers and committee members at the last meeting. The matters that have just been raised have already been considered in the determination of the previous application and can be overcome through the suggested conditions which are suitably worded. But having just listened to the speech, it appears the primary concern is the provision of a basement and the noise, vibration and disturbance issues that could be generated in association with the excavation and construction process. In this regard, it's important to highlight that the Council's Environmental Officer has been consulted on the proposals and has no concerns, noting within his response that the application is supported by a suitably sufficient CTMP which mitigates any issues. Furthermore, conditions 9, 13, 14 and 15 require detailed reports to be submitted prior to any construction, and our clients will adhere to this and will also ensure there is no harm to the neighbours' living conditions as a result of the works. Another point which they raised was the addition of the glazed doors with Juliet balconies at rear ground floor level. On this point, our clients just wanted to reiterate that these are false Juliet balconies as there is no slab behind them. So if you look at the plans, you can see that internally this is a double height space, so there will not be any direct overlooking from them. It will actually be an enhancement to the current arrangement, which as noted features an external balcony, which is going to be removed. In summary, it's clear that the committee member feedback has been taken on board and that the sole reason for refusal has now been addressed. On behalf of our clients, I respectfully request that permission is now granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions? Yes, Waller, Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question to the applicant agent. And a lot of the complaints go about the restriction of parking, noise, dust. I mean, what do you have? What can you promise the objectors that you will put in place to kind of ease their concerns?
I can't personally speak on the technicalities of how the construction will be managed, but if you look at the proposed conditions, there's a very detailed condition for the construction traffic management plan, which sets out really detailed bullet points of what's to be provided. And our clients are very happy to adhere with this and sort of engage and do everything they can to ensure they meet all the requirements of that in line with RBKC policy.
And a question to the objector. What will be, if this is granted, what will be the one thing that you would like us to impose as a condition or as a way for you to kind of like ease your mind?
And I'll just, sorry, before you answer that, I'll just add to that. Obviously, the construction traffic management plan, the CTMP,
already, yeah.
and the CMP have been discussed. I mean, we do, obviously, as a very dense borough, have a lot of these issues of traffic management and construction management, but we can't just stop all developments. We do have quite robust policies which you see before us, but if there's anything you would like to see included in the CTMP, then now would be a good time to mention it as well.
Thank you. Can I just make one point before I pass over to Nicola Crichton-Brown? It's really just going back to the point of adding conditions on to deal with issues such as noise, dust and vibration. We know developments such as basements can cause such a significant impact on neighbours, particularly when they're in close proximity, such as in this case. There isn't a noise, dust and vibration report accompanying the application, and the CTMP is one that was used in the previous application and misses out completely any consideration of other developments in the vicinity. Now, those two elements are requirements of your policy, so really they shouldn't be considered as add-ons required by condition. They should form part of the application when it is submitted so that it can be assessed properly and mitigation measures can be assessed accordingly in terms of impact on neighbours. I'll just pass over to Nicola Crichton-Brown. Thank you.
Thank you. You've asked me what conditions I would like to see. I personally feel that there are no conditions that the council might impose that could ameliorate the deleterious effect of these works. As I said, I've lived in the area for 40 years. I've experienced so many developments in the area. They invariably take far longer, far longer than they are estimated to do so. If they went for a few weeks, a couple of months, I'm sure no one would object. But recently, 3 developments in my immediate area have taken over 3 years. Those were developments at number 43 Brunswick Gardens, number 18 and number 20. They have taken over 3 years with immense disruption, noise, parking problems, etc., etc. And I would just really like to remind the committee, if I may, that, you know, us residents, particularly our long-standing residents, of which I'm one, you know, we have a legal entitlement to quiet enjoyment of our homes, and we are not being given this by the council, who is approving, you know, so many developments in this area, or has approved. I've at the moment got 2 developments on the corner of Berkeley Gardens and Kensington Church Street going on at the same time. One at number 2 Berkeley Gardens and one at whatever, 190 Kensington Church Street. These are 2 massive developments that are going on. The disruption in the street and the noise has been phenomenal. It's just, you know, I'm supposed to be living in a conservation area, not a development one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay, in which case, thank you very much for your time. We'll move to questions to officers. Councillor Wade.
You said this is a revise to a previous plan. What I'm concerned about is that if you look at the rhythm of the back of the buildings, and I understood that we did have a policy that we wanted to retain the integrity of the rear of the buildings in conservation areas. I'm surprised that we have a glazed area covering the ground floor. I'm surprised that we've got Juliet windows. So can you tell me whether that was part of the original application?
Yes, certainly. I mean, the previous application also included Juliet balconies and lower ground floor glazing.
I mean,
the reason why they're considered acceptable is firstly because there is actually one balcony existing. The Juliet balconies don't really project. I mean, they allow opening doors. as an amenity for the rooms behind, the spaces behind, but they don't actually project. And then lower ground floor glazing is not uncommon. I mean, lower ground floors, I mean, generally aren't subject to such long views for obvious reasons. And so it's not unusual to have sort of wide opening folding doors at lower ground floor level.
That terrace of houses were actually built as a piece?
Yes.
That they architecturally are like bookends?
They were built.
So this effectively creates a precedent for anybody who wishes to compromise now the back.
I don't think this would set any precedent for anything, because obviously the juxtaposition of all properties are slightly different. I mean, you can see from the aerial image there that actually the rear elevations, I mean, along Brunswick Gardens have been altered sort of quite significantly. Most properties there have been extended in one way or another.
But it has maintained the original architectural rhythm.
Generally speaking, I don't think that's actually quite true further south in Brunswick Gardens. I mean, there are actually more extensive extensions there.
Right,
to this and the neighbouring properties, as you can see, there's a central extension to the rear elevation at the moment, and there still would be. So that relationship of extension to the parent building would actually be similar to existing.
Right, there are two other questions. One of them is about the fact that if you're going to take the basement area out underneath the front garden, does that compromise any tree planting that could be done in that area? Because there are some trees, aren't there, in the area? And would that restrict the size of trees so that they couldn't be comparable to the other trees in the street? And it is a constrained site, and so I'm very surprised that there isn't a slightly more detailed management plan and construction, traffic management plan for the site.
Well, I mean, taking trees then first, there is a magnolia tree immediately to the north side of the property that was the subject of a lot of close investigation by neighbours consultants and also our own consultants in the previous application. But in fact, our tree consultants were satisfied that no harm should come to that. In terms of construction, as the chairman's already mentioned, and indeed Mrs. Graham has mentioned, I mean, clearly construction works do result in disturbance. I mean, there's no way you can carry out construction without some disturbance at some point. I think that the suite of conditions and controls that back up policy CL7 in this authority are actually, apart from the City of Westminster, who have a similar sort of suite of controls over construction work, that they're actually sort of, more exacting than the vast amount of planning authorities have introduced, and for good reason, because obviously the borough streets are not large. Construction traffic has to work hard to find its way to and from sites. The point about CTMPs, and I think this is quite an important point, is that the CTMP that has been submitted so far is by policy definition a draft CTMP. And that's for a very good reason, because a planning permission is actually valid for 3 years. And it's not really necessary for a draft CTMP now to try to take account of other building works or road works as may happen within the next 3 years. Some of those would not even be known now. And the whole point of the final CTMP condition is to capture those other building works or road works much closer to the point of construction. So it's the final CTMP that really needs to have all that detail.
But you do have cars parked on either side and some quite kind of curvy beds, don't you? So
there will still be difficulties in the future, certainly. But I think it's quite important that that the CTMP doesn't try to, it shouldn't be expected to tie that down now, because things might be quite different in 2 years or 3 years' time. if
And I'm
planning
sorry,
permission is
I've got one
granted.
final question. When you got the demolition picture there, how much of the original brickwork is going to be removed?
On the front and the side, not very much, but obviously you can see on the rear elevation there that clearly there'd be quite an amount of brickwork removed from the rear.
And it would be replaced with comparable bricks?
Yes, it would, yeah.
Sorry.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about flooding, and we know we had recent flooding in Kensington, which is kind of, one would say lifetime, but lifetime just keep coming back every 10 years or so. I understand from the application form, paragraph 6.17 and 6.18, that the flooding officer have visited the area, and the area may just be outside of the Kensington critical drainage. So how close it is, and what could be the impact of similar flooding we had just last year, if it happens again?
Well, I mean, the condition 16 relates to sewer flooding, and very importantly, condition 17 relates to sustainable drainage. The whole point of policy CE2 and sustainable drainage is to actually reduce the runoff from any particular site. So as part of the requirements to satisfy that condition, the policy target is to reduce runoff into the sewers by 50%, which is quite a significant reduction in the runoff from any site.
So I just have one question on noise, dust and vibration. So we heard objectors mention that obviously it's going to be an issue. It's not unique in that regard, but certainly this is a very constrained site, as you've said. So can you just quickly summarise how the conditions currently would manage the noise, dust and vibration element of the construction?
Well, the noise, dust and vibration obviously comes into policy CL7. It's one of the criteria of CL7 which relates to basement development, as you know. I think by far the most sort of the exacting requirement in terms of noise and dust, though, is not CL7 itself. It's actually the Code of Construction Practice. So the Code of Construction Practice actually brings together planning controls, environmental health controls, highways controls, and in the site construction management plan, which would have to be approved by the construction management team as part of the submissions under that condition, would have to spell out exactly what the contractor's methods of control would be. I mean, I'd suspect that the applicants wouldn't even know that detail at the moment, but the contractors would have to work that up, and that's a requirement of that condition.
Okay, so that will all obviously take place before final planning is granted, yeah. Any other questions? No. Okay, well, let's proceed to a decision then. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Wade.
Abstain.
Councillor Ali. In favour?
Yeah, in favour.
Yeah. Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Idris.
In favour.
And I'm in favour as well, so that's 4 in favour with 1 abstention. Thank you very much for your time. I know it's been a late evening. We now move on to 19 Farm Place, and back to you, Mr. Taylor.
Proposal to form a roof terrace and green roof at main roof level. I thought I'd start with an aerial slide, as you see there. The application, as usual, is identified by a red star. I think the aerial image is quite useful in showing that number 19 and also number 20 that you see there at the lower part of the photograph, they don't have their original valley roofs. They both basically have altered roofs, flat roofs. And you can see moving up the photograph, heading northwards from number 19, that numbers 18 right up to number 11 do all retain their valley roofs. And that creates a different situation for the application property. It is 1 story higher, and it has a flat roof. Those are the existing elevations, the front elevation at the left, and on the right, that's the rear elevation. And then that's the proposed front elevation on the left, and the proposed rear elevation on the right. So you see, in elevational terms, the only thing that changes is the introduction of railings at roof level. Bear in mind that those elevations are true elevations, so you can't see the setback of the railings there. But that's how they would be in elevation terms. That image actually now shows the section. You can see it's a long section through the property, and you can see the setback of railings to the left, which is at the back of the building, and also to the right on the Farm Place elevation. And then I've just blown that up there so you can sort of better understand the setback. The areas outside the railings, as you can sort of maybe make out from that image, that they're to be green roof. So there'd be green roof outside the railings to the front and the rear. And you can see by the setback of the railings that actually by setting them in, that would restrict any potential views from roof level. Clearly you would see far more from the roof if the railings allowed you to go right to the edge of the roof. But being centralised, you don't really get an invasive angle of view down from the roof. And I think that's the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And yeah, apologies to people speaking on this. We've kept you waiting a very long time, but we finally got there. So, Mr. Coyle, I believe you're speaking in objection. So, 3 minutes, whenever you're ready.
Yes, I've lived in Farm Place in the Hillgate Conservation Area since 1994. That's about 27 years. I have a small garden at the back of the house, and I believe that number 19 Farm Place, which has recently changed hands, and which is opposite my house, has also got a small garden at the back. A satellite view shows that 19 Farm Place has a flat roof behind the parapet wall. If there's a leak in the roof of number 19, the leak should be repaired and the roof should not be changed to create a roof garden. There are 4 tall buildings in Farm Place. They are numbers 19 and 20 Farm Place, and then number 10 Farm Place, Uxbridge Street, and 10 Farm Place, Hillgate Place. None of these has a roof garden. Number 20 Farm Place has a balcony well below roof height on which there are some plants. Today, conservation is highly valued, hence my objection to the present application regarding 19 Farm Place. If a roof garden is authorised for 19 Farm Place, the other tall buildings in Farm Place could probably not be stopped from doing the same thing, breaching the conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're also joined by Mr. and Mrs. Uni, who are the applicants. So likewise, you have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Good evening, members. I'm Kieran Uni, and this is my wife, Isabella. We are the applicants. We purchased 19 Farm Place last year, and it's our family home. We've worked hard to make sure the proposed roof terrace complies with all relevant council policies. As your officer has explained, the proposed terrace is a modest development. It's been designed sympathetically so it won't be visible from the street. It won't result in any significant or unacceptable impact upon the residential amenity of the area, and it will be a valuable small area of open space for us. We're sympathetic to Mr. Coyle and other neighbours' concerns, which I want to address specifically. Mr. Coyle's objections include the loss of the conservation area, or damage to the conservation area, the proposal preserves the character and appearance of the conservation area, the street scene of which it forms a part, and the parent building. We have a flat roof, as Mr. Taylor observed, not a butterfly roof like the other properties in the street. Our property is already different from the rest of the terrace, as it has a third floor. We're maintaining our existing chimneys to both sides of the terrace and maintaining the strong parapet line of the parent building. And the roof terrace will be largely unnoticeable within the wider context of the site. Another objection that might be made is that creating a roof terrace will let us see into the top floor of bedrooms. There are three answers to this. First, our roof terrace is on the third floor, which is 2 floors higher than the top floor of all the houses opposite. The top floor is the first floor for the houses opposite. So it would actually be harder to see into those rooms from the roof terrace than from existing windows on the first or second floor of 19 Farm Place, because of the steeper angle of view from the third floor to the first floor. The second point is that the terrace would be set back by over 1 metre from the front elevation and nearly 2.5 metres from the rear elevation, and there's a parapet at the front of the building which will remain intact. These features further limit the ability to look down from the terrace, ability to look down from the terrace into the street or into the buildings opposite, and this is a key aspect of our design. And third, in any event, Council Policy CL5 acknowledges that some degree of intervisibility is acceptable in a dense townscape. We're proposing traditional metal railings, which are a common feature throughout the village. The railings won't be visible from the immediate road and gardens surrounding the site because the terrace is considerably set back, and the traditional appearance of the railings will preserve more distant private views. We intend to use the space as a peaceful roof garden in much the same manner as when we use a traditional garden. And finally, the green roofs to the rear and front section of the building form part of sustainable building practices. Green roofs improve air quality and biodiversity, dampen noise, and reduce water runoff. We respectfully invite members to agree with the recommendations of the officers and approve our application. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much. Colleagues, Councillor Wade.
I'm not quite sure how to explain this, but there's a diagram here which you've got 18U, 20, 44.
Could we get the image up on the screen, perhaps?
It's this one. And the problem is I can't see what the...
Do you have it? That's the plan, the bird's eye view plan of the street. Do we have that?
There's no number on that, so I think, is it 42? The question I have is, if the balcony, if the garden is going to be used, what impact is going to be on that building?
So,
did you understand what I'm trying to say?
So number 44.
Yeah. It's that. It's, if that's the extent. Can I go and explain it to the chair?
Okay, and is that question to the applicant or to the applicant? Okay. So the building to the right is 44, number 42. So the question is, what impact, particularly in terms of overlooking, I think, will the roof terrace have on number 42?
We think it's 42, but there's no number on the plan.
If you number them.
It's just from the plan with the little red line. You go back quite a lot, so you go back past 20, plus 44, and then there's a building next door to it. Because everything's very close in that area, isn't it?
Yes. Do you have the bird's eye view plan on the pack?
I don't.
Do you have this one?
No.
No. Okay. Well, number 42 Hillgate Place. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The answer is minimal impact because I think for at least two reasons. The first is that our roof terrace is a whole floor higher, and because the railings are set back from where the actual garden is, the terrace is, you can't actually see 42. The second reason is that there is still quite a lot of space, even beyond the railings, to 42, and there's also the chimney, or two chimneys either side, and one of the chimneys is towards 42. So I believe that there's minimal impact and there'd actually be extremely limited visibility to the rear of the building, particularly Hillgate Place.
I can't really see it.
Is that, Councillor Wade, satisfy you?
I still really can't see the extent of the...
42 wrote in.
The roof terrace.
They wrote in, it's in the objection.
Okay, Councillor Wade, apparently number 42 wrote a letter in, so...
If we look at that and we go through the plans, it doesn't really show us the extent.
Well, perhaps it's something we've raised in the next section with Mr. Taylor.
And so I'm just asking, and did you talk to the residents of what we consider to be 42?
Yes, I can take that. Yes, we contacted 10 neighbouring properties on Farm Place, Hillgate Place and Colcott Street, which would have included 42. We wanted them to hear from us directly about the proposed plan, to understand our rationale and how we had preemptively tried to address any potential concerns they might have about overlooking by setting the terrace back by 2.4 metres from the rear of the property, and also to allay any fears about the preservation of the context and character of the conservation area. And I want to thank Mr. Cole for kindly taking the time to write back to us, so that was appreciated.
Because it's not necessarily just about overlooking, it's because all the buildings are so close together in that area that it's the kind of noise transmission. So, you know, you're up at the top and you're having a couple of people over for a drink, and actually noise disperses. I know there's the condition on you won't be able to see the heating and everything else, but it was just because it does seem to be very close at that corner. That was the reason why.
If I may, I believe the other point is that, so 42 doesn't have a roof terrace, I believe. It's a butterfly roof like all of the other houses. So there'd be no overlooking any terrace, because there is no roof terrace in 42. And I don't believe there is a direct angle from where the proposed terrace on 19 Farm Place is meant to be, because it's so far set back, into the windows of 42. If there is, I can't guarantee that, but if there is, it would be extremely limited.
But I'm referring to noise transmission.
To noise. We don't propose, we don't consider that the modest roof terrace, which is really very small, would generate unacceptable noise. It would generate no more noise than a traditional garden, of which there are several in the area, and there are even certain balconies, and I believe, for example, 42 Hillgate Place has a balcony, which is actually not that much smaller than the proposed roof terrace in 19 Farm Place. Again, it would generate no more noise than that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Woodger.
My question is to the objector, Mr. Cole. If you were sitting in our shoes and we were minded to grant, would there be any conditions you'd be wanting to put on this application?
Could you say that a bit, make it louder, because unfortunately my hearing is not so good.
No problem. if we were minded to grant this application, would there be any conditions you would want to put in, if they're possible? Obviously, we'll consult with the officers on that.
Sorry, if the thing is going to be granted, then I'm afraid there's nothing which I could suggest which would improve the situation, but it's, you know, so I just have to swallow it.
Okay, and then in terms of consultation, were you notified by the applicant of the application? Did they consult with you? Did they talk to you?
Sorry,
did the applicant consult with you about their application? I'm asking about how the consultation was.
Sorry, I'm afraid that I can't hear very well.
Did Isabella and Karan, did the applicant did they talk to you? Did they consult with you about the...
Yes, well, I can't remember how it was, but we did have a discussion about it. I think they may have suggested that's what they would like to do. I was not in favour of it because up till now, you know, there hasn't been a thing like that on top of that roof, and so I guess I'll have to live with it.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you very much. I just have one more question for Mr. and Mrs. Zuni. Regarding the metal balustrades, I know there's one objector mentioned that they thought they would be unsympathetic. I just wonder what your exact plans are for them, and is there anything, you know, of a relevant period in the area that you could draw upon as a design?
Yes, the black metal railings we're proposing are fairly traditional in the area. They're really prominent in Hillgate Village. The majority of the front light wells in Hillgate Village are enclosed by similar, if not identical, style railings. And the use of simple metal railings, in our view, ensures that the space remains subservient and sympathetic to the age and the character of the parent building and the associated conservation area.
So the railings won't be sort of contemporary in design?
Absolutely not. The style we're envisaging for the entire house, which hasn't been touched for, I think, several decades, is faithful to the traditional nature of the conservation area. The railings are also going to be traditional metal railings.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Ali, and then Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're aware of that the area is a conservation area, and of course the objections that we have read from neighbouring specifically is noise pollution, and you and your family are going to live there, and we just wanted to know what, of course you've done the consultation and you've met and you have some supporters as well as some objectors. Is there anything you are planning to do in terms of satisfying your neighbours' requirement, whether it's the use or, of course we're not here to tell you how to use your own property, but the hours of use to make sure that the noise level is acceptable to the local area? Bearing in mind you are setting a new standard for the area, or unprecedented according to some of them, was whether you're making change to a conservation area. What is your plan for the future for this use of the terrace?
This is our family home. I am a barrister. I work from home. I work very long hours during the day. My wife also works very long hours during the day. We both intend to work from home most of the day. We tend to be in bed by this time most evenings, and we're up very early. We're not proposing to use the roof terrace for parties and to spend, play music all night long by any means. We're the opposite of that. So in terms of the concerns that some of the neighbours have raised about sound disturbance through the night, sound disturbance is something which we're particularly sensitive to, and because we like to go to bed early and sleep undisturbed. So we can immediately allay the concerns of any neighbours on that basis. the terrace, the modest terrace that we want, is going to be used, admittedly very rarely in the year because of the British weather, but on the few days in the spring and in the summer where it's okay to go outside, we'd want to sit there, maybe have breakfast, the two of us, possibly have lunch, sit down, catch some sun, have a drink, the two of us. It's not big enough to have a party, and we certainly, at our stage of life, don't want to do that at all. And we certainly don't see that the roof terrace would be used in any way that's different from any of the gardens to the rear of all the properties in the area, which are around the same sort of size. And actually, a point which I've thought of is that because we're a whole story higher than other areas, we actually, and because the roof terrace is set back, we actually don't think it's going to make as much noise, even if we're just talking up there, or there are three of us up there talking, as the gardens on the ground floor would, or the lower ground floor would. We actually think we're going to be less contributive to noise in the area than the gardens and balconies in the area.
Yes, Councillor, one more.
Okay, one follow-up question finishing with this point. You've mentioned in terms of the usage for your family, of course you've got family and friends, people do come over, and of course it's fine because it's your property. Having said that, we have to take into consideration what neighbours and others have been saying about this application form. So could you give us rough estimate of the capacity of the terrace? And I won't say, of course, two of you, but rough estimate, how many people can occupy?
Of course. I mean, you might have been able to see from the plan there, but because we're pushing the railings in quite significantly, particularly in the rear, but also at the front, the area, I'd say, if you're standing, I think if you had 6 people there, it would feel like a crowd. It would feel very, 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 very crowded.
Councillor Idris.
Yeah, the chair stole one of my questions, so I have only one question left, which is my favorite question. You talked about biodiversity. This is your only outside space. And do you have outside space downstairs, or is that the only one, the roof terrace?
So to the rear of the property, we also have a small patio.
You have a small patio. So you talked about biodiversity. Will you be planting pollinators?
So we'll take advice from our architect on the best kind of green roof to put up on the roof terrace. He's worked with green roofs on other projects, so I think he's well placed to give us advice. We are not sustainability experts by any means, but when we realised that setting the roof terrace back would free up this redundant space, we thought it would be a great idea to have that extra space for green roof, to be able to hopefully increase the air quality, increase the biodiversity, and then have additional benefits of slowing down water runoff, which is something that's all pretty important to us after the flash floods of last year, as well as having some acoustic dampening effect, apparently. So we are keen to implement the green roof if possible.
Councillor Idris is a great champion of bees in the borough. So, yeah, if you are able to incorporate pollinators and flowers that support and help encourage the bees, Councillor Idris, for one, and many others would be delighted.
And we do have the bee superhighway in the borough, and once you planted pollinators in your property, you can become part of the network of pollinators in the borough. Thank you.
Fantastic, yes. No other questions in this section, so we'll move on to questions to Mr Taylor or other officers. Councillor Wade.
Could you please clarify the plan?
Yes, this was a question before. If you could bring up the image of the bird's eye view. I don't think we only have the satellite photo, but that'll have to do.
Sorry, yeah, did you have a question relating to that?
Yeah, well, if you could bring up the satellite photo.
Mr. Taylor, there's a line illustration in the pack which indicates the location of the applicant's property.
Yeah.
In my pack, I've got 18, I've got a red mark which indicates the extent, I believe, of the applicant's property.
So can I just
Next door
check,
to
you're
its
referring to
20.
the Ordnance Survey
Yes.
extract, I think, yeah.
I'm looking at, then you get 44, and then you get a building alongside 44, which seems to abut the applicant's property.
Which is number
that-
40,
is that
number
44?
42.
42.
Yeah, that's number 42.
All right. What I'm trying to work out is, now I understand the butterfly roofs, but actually it's quite hard to see whether or not there are actually any windows on the rear elevation of that building. So I presume there must be. And it's more about the sound transmission rather than, and the extent, because I couldn't find in my pack the extent of the garden and precisely what part of the property that the actual garden is covering.
The roof garden.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's impact on 42, overlooking, but to a greater extent, what do we estimate the impact of sound from that roof would be on the residents of number 42?
Well, I think in my view, the way to approach this is to look at the existing relationship between number 42 and the application property. And I think the best way I can illustrate that is if you look at the slide I'm showing at the moment on the right-hand side, the right-hand image basically is the rear elevation to the application property number 19. If you, in your mind's eye, sort of imagine where number 42 is in relation to that, 42 is a story lower, and it's also to the side of it. And 42, I don't have a rear elevation for it, but obviously 42 is a residential house that will have its own windows in the rear. The windows that you see here in the right-hand image would be roughly at right angles to windows at the rear of number 42. So there's already a relationship between the buildings in terms of their rear windows. To add a terrace in the middle of the roof at number 19, I would suggest would not make much difference at all to the possibility of sound transfer between the two properties. Windows can be opened, they're domestic properties, and there's just as much chance of noise disturbance in a closely built up area as we have there with or without a roof terrace. The roof terrace is central to the roof, so particularly as you've understood, it wouldn't allow views directly down. In noise terms, I don't think the roof terrace would have any different use profile to a residential garden or indeed the interior of a residential property.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay, in which case we will proceed to a decision. The recommendation is to grant planning permission. Councillor Wade?
Grant.
In favour. Councillor Ali? In favour. Councillor Wood, yeah?
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Idris?
In favour.
And I'm also in favour, so that passes unanimously. And yes, thank you very much to Mr. Corwell and Mr. and Mrs. Uni for your time. Sorry to have kept you so long.
Thank you.
No problem. We now proceed to 115 to 117 Highlever Road.
Right. Microphone on. This is a proposal for a policy-compliant amalgamation of two dwellings together with the construction of a rear extension. The first slide shows an aerial image, and you'll see the properties in question outlined there in the red outline. And you'll see that there's already a rear extension at the centre of the two properties. That plan shows the demolition that would take place to the right-hand side. The areas in red would be the parts of the existing building that would be demolished. So essentially it's demolishing part of the rear extension and also a bay window to the side in the light well that you can see there in plan. And in terms of the rear elevation, that shows the parts of the existing rear extension that would be demolished. And you'll see the bay window in the light well there on the left-hand side, again in red. And there's the bay window at the side, again in red, indicating that would be demolished. You'll see that at the right-hand side of the image, there's an existing balcony that would be demolished, hence it's in red. And that's the proposed rear elevation. So it's proposed to reintroduce the balcony that you see there at first floor level. And then to the left-hand side of the property, there's an infill in the light well that you can see basically with, it's the left-hand set of French doors that you see in the rear elevation. And the ground floor plan basically shows what would be provided internally. So you can see that there's a large family room provided through the extension. And that's the section as proposed. So you can see that's a section through the light well infill to the side of the property. And that was the last slide.
Thank you. We don't have any speakers in this case, so yes, Councillor Wade.
I'm genuinely worried about this application because I think that I understood we had a policy about amalgamations, and I don't understand what the justification is for it. There seems to be an impact on 119. The rear of the building appears to be changed. We appear to have a newly constructed fence going down the side, going in the middle of the garden. It seems that works appear to have started before permission has been granted, or alterations which would change the perspective of our decision. And it does concern me. So what is the Planning Department's justification for amalgamation, given the history of the building, which was clearly looking at Mr. Peterson's thing about it being Cleveland Housing Association for the conversion of 2 dwellings into 4 self-contained flats. Is it because of the condition of the property? What is the justification for the amalgamation? Is it just commercial, or is it because the condition of the property has got into such a state that it needs to be a total revise? And what can we do to prevent the other 2 properties becoming amalgamated?
The justification for amalgamation.
Well, I mean, in short, I think the justification for the amalgamation on the part of the applicant would presumably be to form a larger dwelling. The policy, if you recall when the policy was being discussed and introduced, there was a huge amount of discussion relating to how to control and how far to control amalgamation of dwellings. Eventually, the figure of 170 square metres was settled upon, meaning that an amalgamation of flats couldn't really be larger houses, but flats, amalgamation of units that would be less than 170 square metres would comply with the policy. And this one would result in 169 square metres, so they comply with the policy. Now, for an amalgamation larger than that, if they in the future wanted to amalgamate with another unit in the building, then they would need planning permission, and that would obviously be outside the policy. So basically, this is a policy compliance amalgamation. I mean, there was a large amount of debate at the time as to, as I say, how far to control it, and the policy is as it is. The policy could change in the future, but let's not go there for the moment. I mean, so it's a policy compliance amalgamation. In terms of fences in the gardens, they could erect a fence anyway of up to 2 metres in height without requiring planning permission. So that's
But there does seem to be a
not an
substantial
issue.
impact on 119. If you look at the rear build out, it will impact on them.
Is this regarding the fence or the main construction?
Well, it's because the rear of 119, you have the closet wing, and then you have the kind of the recessed area, and therefore this extension would appear, unless I might have written wrong, that the extension at the rear of 115, 117 would come out and actually take light from that recessed area of 119.
You can probably see from the rear elevation that I'm showing there that 119 already has an infill within its light well.
But it looks from the picture like
it's a lighter weight infill, it's more glazed. But again, planning permission isn't required to actually erect a boundary wall of up to 2 metres in any event, and this would add 3 feet to that. The addition of that, when you take into account the rear extension, which would be immediately behind it, that there wouldn't be any material impact in light terms.
And what about the width of the terrace and the removal of the staircase, so that people who live in 115 on the first floor can't gain access to the garden? That's changing its use.
Well, the terrace would be reproduced, as I said in the introduction. I mean, you can see there in the red, that's the existing terrace that would be removed, and it's now proposed to reinstate the terrace, but running the full width of the rear extension. But there wouldn't really be any additional views you would get by adding a bit at each end of the terrace. The terrace is effectively in the same position, affording the same angles of view that you could get at the moment.
And what about the claim that the staircase was removed?
There's no staircase proposed to come down from the terrace.
And there's no existing staircase or proposed staircase, so there's no change in that regard.
Well, one of the objectors claims that actually a staircase was removed and that there's actually a gap in the existing balcony, and that the terrace proposed is actually double the size. Therefore, changing it.
I mean, I don't know what exactly has been removed, but if anything has been removed in the past, I don't think it's that relevant to what they're proposing now.
Any more? Yes, Councillor Ali, and then Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. In terms talking about the terraces, it will result in loss of privacy. What can be done about that? But some of the response is already impacting neighbouring properties, and it's causing a degree of loss of privacy. But what can be done about that for this development?
Well, I think that the key comparison is with the views that could be had from their existing terrace in comparison with the views that could be had from the proposed one. So the elevation that I'm showing there shows the existing terrace in the red. So you can see it's at first floor level. It's lined up with the doors that access it. It doesn't go right to the edge. In the proposed, that they've extended it to the edge on each side. But the additional angles of view would not be greatly different. I mean, the views would be downwards, just as they are at the moment.
Just follow up, so the recommendation from officers will be no change?
There would be no significant change in overlooking terms, no. I'll put it in different terms. Areas that would be private at the moment would still be private. So there wouldn't be areas that could now be overlooked that are not overlooked at the moment.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Idris.
A couple of questions. My first question is, in one of the letters, Michael Bach is saying the address is wrong. Is that correct? The address is actually not 115 to 117, but it's 117.
I think there's a slight misunderstanding there, that it's the large majority of the changes are to 117, but there are some slight changes on the frontage of 115, which is why they included them both. Is that correct?
I think that's right, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that clarifies things in my head.
Yeah.
The other thing is, are we allowing amalgamation because they already started work and it was more or less an outcome of that, or is it is totally different?
Yeah,
Because-
it's totally different. I mean, we're allowing or recommending the allowing of amalgamation because it complies with the relevant housing policy. Whatever work they're doing at the property, do bear in mind that they can do strip outs and quite an amount of work in a property without requiring planning permission. They only require planning permission once they commence construction work. So I don't know what they're doing there at the moment, but they could well just be stripping out and doing stuff that didn't require planning permission anyway. But the recommendation in relation to amalgamation has nothing to do with the work they are doing, whatever that is. It's because it complies with policy.
So if we, as a borough, frown upon recommendation, you did explain earlier the numbers, the 170 to the 169. I mean, why isn't it a blanket rule, no amalgamation period, no exception?
That's what the policy is. So we could change the policy in future policy reviews, but that is the current policy.
So that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Why are we trying to allow it? Because the policy is still no.
Policy allows it if the resultant property remains below 170 square metres, which this one does just. So it is policy compliant.
So net gain and net loss, have we lost property as a result of this?
Yes, I mean, a dwelling is being absorbed into another dwelling in
Okay.
compliance with the policy.
All right.
That's the whole point of the 170 square metre threshold.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, it's just worth saying that the policies are under review at the moment. I mean, work has started on the replacement for the local plan. And that policy may well change, but as a committee, you can only take a decision in accordance
On
with the
what
policy
was
that's in force
existing,
now.
yeah. All right, thank you.
Councillor Woodger.
As this is policy compliant, if we were to refuse this, I'm guessing this would probably get through on appeal, most likely.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly, at the very least, if those were the grounds for refusal, then it would do. There might be other grounds. Any other question? No. Okay, in which case we should proceed to a decision. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Wade. Against. Councillor Ali.
I will go against this one.
Against. Councillor Woodger.
As it's just about policy compliant, approved.
In favour. Councillor Idris.
Against.
Against.
Yeah,
and I'm in favour, but the outcome is 3-2 against. We now need someone to propose a reason for rejection. Who would like to propose a reason? Councillor Wade.
I think the borough needs two-bedroom flats, and I think that the loss of the two-bedroom flats is against council policy. Actually,
Okay.
that we've got housing targets
I would also, yeah.
And those are precisely the units that we need.
And that's where I would go. I would say...
I don't know how you word it, but that's actually what we need.
Yeah, we can't afford to lose. We need to add. And
You're very welcome to propose that. I couldn't vote in favour of it because it's not in line with policy as just described. The only things I can see which I think might be more defensible are perhaps sense of enclosure due to the higher wall on that side as regards 119.
Right.
But if you would like to propose that, by all means do.
Enclosure, whatever it does, but we've got to retain the two-bedroom flats.
Well, if that's your reason for rejecting it, then that should be the reason you propose, and we can vote on that reason.
Shouldn't we have a reason that we all three agree on?
Enclosure, privacy, enclosure.
Mr. Taylor, could you assist?
Can I just say a little bit about the housing side of things? It's very important, I think, for you to note whatever concerns you have in relation to two-bedroom flats, which I totally understand, it's very important to note that this proposal does comply with the policy that's in force at the moment. The policy doesn't have sub-provisions that relate to whether or not there's a unit of a certain type that would be amalgamated. I mean, the policy was subject to a huge amount of discussion, and they fixed it 170 square metres as the key threshold. As long as a amalgamation is beneath that threshold, then whether it's a one-bedroom flat or a two-bedroom flat or a studio doesn't come into it.
Okay,
so this does comply with the housing policy, whether we like it or not.
So to strengthen our objection,
You're a magician, Mr. Taylor, and so I'm sure that you can probably come up with something.
I can't rewrite policy for you. That's one thing I can't do.
Okay, so shall we go with what Tom suggested, which is the enclosure and the sense of enclosure?
Yes, I mean, strictly speaking, the reasons we vote on should be the reasons for which we made the decision.
Yeah.
So we can't go and make something convenient which we think is defensible if that's not the reason, and we've stated at this meeting that that's not the reason. So based on the discussions we've had, is there anything, Mr. Taylor, you could recommend?
I mean, one point that the committee would need to consider and decide on would be whether the widening of the balcony, in your view, could lead to other angles of overlooking. I mean, you've heard my advice to you that you wouldn't really see into spaces from the slightly wider balcony, but you may choose to disagree with that. You could conclude that the balcony being widened would have to allow a slightly wider range of views. That's
would also the erection of the 3-metre wall, which a number of objectors have mentioned, potentially increase the sense of enclosure in 119?
I think the erection of a 3-metre wall, by a matter of fact and degree, would result in a greater sense of enclosure than exists at the moment. And it would be greater than would result from a permitted development 2-metre wall that they could do anyway. So you could consider that the additional metre over and above what they could do anyway, by a matter of fact and degree, would make enough difference. But obviously the officer recommendation is that extra 3 feet over what they could do anyway wouldn't be a significant change or a significant impairment to the neighbouring property. But you can disagree with that, clearly.
Yeah, so colleagues, you've had a couple of reasons there suggested by Mr. Taylor. I will reiterate that we shouldn't be creating reasons to justify voting against. We should be stating reasons why we voted against. But with that in mind, and bearing Mr. Taylor's comments in mind, would anyone like to propose a reason for refusal?
I'm going back to this. Yeah, now it's working. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm going back to the same reason that I've mentioned before and the same reason that I've rejected, which is the loss of privacy, and we've talked about it, as well as loss of sunlight, which could be caused by the 3-meter wall. So I would base on that, and I will be happy to use that as a reason.
So yeah, privacy from the loss of privacy from the balcony, loss of sunlight and sensitive enclosure from the extension.
From the 3-meter wall.
Okay. Would anyone like to second that? Councillor Wade, second that. So we'll vote on that as the reason for refusal. Councillor Wade, presumably in favour. Yes, in favour. Councillor Rowley in favour. Councillor Wood, you're against. Councillor Idris in favour, and I'll vote against as well, but that's passed 3-2 as the reason for refusal. Okay, so we now move on to 103 Elgin Crescent.
Okay, so this application basically proposes a basement to number 103 Elgin Crescent. You can see the first slide that shows the existing building with the basement, which is the lowest level that you can see in the slide. So it's a single-storey basement proposed with a small light well at the front, and then a small amount of excavation at the rear. And that's a policy-compliant basement, so it complies with all the criteria of policy CL7. And that's just a close-up of the basement, so you can sort of better understand the relationship with the floor above it. And you can see the light well there at the front. And that's the basement plan. So you can see that they're proposing a utility room and a games room and a lounge area there at the front. And the front elevation basically doesn't change, and then the rear elevation doesn't change much either. The work is all down at the basement level, and that's the last slide, Chairman.
Thanks. I'll answer the first question. Just a number of the objections regard worries about the CTMP and refer specifically to the width of the street. Could you just tell us is there a standard way of taking into account the narrow width of a particular street when determining an appropriate CTMP?
Yes, there is. I mean, the highways team who assess all the draft CTMPs sort of look very carefully at the width of the streets, that they take into account parking in the streets and how much width would remain. And essentially they're satisfied here that the draft CTMP is acceptable. As I was saying earlier this evening, I mean, the real key to it is to get the final stage CTMP sort of attuned to whatever the conditions are at that time. But in terms of the width of the street and local parking and so on, the highways officers are satisfied that this would comply with all the normal standards.
No, are we likely to require a gangway running above the pavement? Would that be appropriate in this circumstance?
I don't have that detail to hand. Quite possibly. I think I mean, my guess would be that might be the best way to do it. In which case we'd need to have drawings and so on that would be part of the final stage CTMP.
Okay, well, I mean, would seem the best option to me, but as you say, we don't have all the details in front of us, so perhaps it's best to leave that to highways officers when the CTMP comes forward. Yes, Councillor Idris.
Hi, thank you. I see that the flooding and drainage have been addressed, and it looks good on paper. But isn't this address very close to all the flooding and the problems? I mean, isn't there a slight concern at all?
I think that there's always concern in the Elgin sort of area. That's obviously part of the drainage basin that sort of drains down to the west from Notting Hill. All the water naturally with gravity wants to drain downwards. So it's always a concern. But having said that, our policy is a very exacting policy. So that they have managed to comply with that, with their sustainable drainage details that they've already submitted. Sometimes where we're not happy in the first stage, we'll set that aside by condition. But in this case, they actually provided a very good sustainable drainage statement. So that's why condition 15 just requires them to accord with that statement.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Wade.
I'm mystified by this. The property is also subject to the borough-wide Article 4, number 100, removing rights for single-storey basement extensions onto the footprint of the building. But this application is for precisely that. So
Yes.
Can somebody perhaps explain to me what the strength of an Article 4 is? How did they manage to get this application through, even if it was... I'm just kind of surprised, because it's quite a large building. It's in a flood area. I'm just interested, really.
It's fairly simple in the sense that an Article 4 direction withdraws permitted development rights. So you'll be familiar that a single-family dwelling can add various forms of extension without requiring planning permission. That's embedded in the general planning development order. The Article 4 direction withdraws the permitted development right to construct a basement without planning permission. So that is why planning permission is required for any basement in this borough. There are no permitted development rights for basements here because of the Article 4 direction. If there wasn't an Article 4 direction, I mean, they might well have been able to excavate something pretty close to that without requiring planning permission. So that the fact that you have the application before you is that's the explanation as to why the Article 4 direction is there.
I'm sure that Councillor Kassim will probably cover the flooding, but it was just, it just seems to be that it's in a conservation area with a high level of flooding. You've got, it just, what is the potential risk assessment on adjacent buildings?
But we can't, I absolutely see your point, but we can't go back and second guess the reasons for it already being granted, and it has already been granted. So that's a situation we find ourselves in.
I mean, but what I would say here is that they've actually submitted a very good flooding and drainage statement. If it wasn't good enough, then we'd be recommending a condition requiring a new one, which you'll see in quite a few applications. But actually, this is quite a good one, hence the...
Any other questions? No? Okay, in which case let's proceed to a decision. The recommendation is to grant. I'll start at the other end this time. Councillor Idris.
Happy to know that I agree.
In favour?
In favour.
Councillor Woodsher.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Ali.
In favour.
Councillor Wade. In favour. And I'm in favour, so that passes unanimously. We now move on to Leighton House Museum.
Right, just one slide for you for this one. Essentially, this is an application for consent to display an advertisement. So I think you'll probably be very familiar with Leighton House. And if you look at the single image that I'm showing there, you'll see the letters Leighton House attached to the wall on the pavement, well, not on the pavement, above the pavement, as you see there in the image. So the signage requires advertisement consent, that there are recommended conditions. I'll draw your attention to the addendum report that actually limits the illumination of the signs to something somewhat less than normal signage illumination. That the justification for that is A, that's what they're proposing anyway, but B, obviously it's a largely residential street, so the whole point is not to have too bright letters. And then there's also a condition proposed in the addendum report requiring that apart from half an hour before opening and half an hour after closing, the illumination should be turned off. And that's the recommendation.
It's pretty straightforward. Any questions?
I think it's an improvement to the building.
Yeah, I think it looks good. So the recommendation is to grant. Councillor Idris.
Grant.
In favour. Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
In favour. Councillor Ali.
In favour.
In favour. Councillor Wade. In favour, and I'm in favour, so that passes unanimously. And then we finish with flats 1 to 45, Bramley House.
So this last application for the evening is basically proposing new windows, which would be triple glazed timber windows to Bramley House. So you can see there from the photograph, obviously Bramley House is a fairly typical inter-war development. And you can see the existing windows are of the Georgian style at each level. And then those two images basically show an example of the existing windows in the left-hand image, and then the proposed windows in the right-hand image. So you can see that they're actually matching the style of the window, the width of the glazing bars, the width of the framing, and so on. So it's timber for timber. The only difference is these windows are more sustainable because they're triple glazed.
Very straightforward. Councillor Wade.
Questions. Do they have trickle vents, and what is the difference in the width of the bits, the wooden bits?
Well, they're actually...
They're going to be thicker because of it's triple glazed, isn't it, in the bars of the window?
The glazing bars would need to be a little bit deeper from front to rear in order to provide the depth to put the three pieces of glass in.
But,
in terms of the elevation, they're actually the same.
They look, so it look the same?
Yeah,
but
so if you look at the two images there, you can see that what you actually see in elevational terms would be the same window.
All right. Are they going to be trickle vented?
They don't include trickle vents, no.
They don't?
No.
So what about ventilation?
I don't know how the rooms are ventilated, that there may be other ventilation mechanisms within the rooms, I don't know.
It's just sometimes that when you do install triple glazing or double glazing, it's a good idea to have trickle venting to improve air circulation within the room.
Maybe we just add an informative, just reminding, well, it's our own construction team
especially if you're on lower ground floors or lower levels, people don't necessarily want to open their windows, and therefore it protects from mould.
So we'll just, we'll add an informative to remind them to consider ventilation and consider whether trickle venting is an option or other forms of ventilation. I'm sure they have done.
I'm frowning slightly just because we don't really like trickle vents. I mean, I wouldn't want to encourage trickle vents. That they can be quite an awkward interruption in the profile of a window. Could I word an informative in a slightly generalised way, just saying you are reminded of building regulation requirements for room ventilation? Just do it in a general way.
I think that sounds like a very good idea. Right, so with that informative added, oh sorry, Kasim, go ahead.
The final one, this is much needed improvement, of course. for the whole council homes that need this development. However, my question is about safety and child lock, anything to do with safety. Is there anything has been, I can't see anything mentioned in here for the safety. So, Mr. Taylor, can you give us a bit of information about the safety and children, maybe the top floors?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, it's...
Is there safety in terms of children climbing out of the window?
Yes, that's right. Safety features for children or any...
I mean, at the end of the day, safety features internal to a room do not require planning permission, so that there's all sorts of grills or rails that can be introduced inside to prevent children sort of climbing up. Essentially, the existing windows would be no different to the proposed windows in terms of safety. There's no reason to assume that a triple glazed window is any less safe than a single glazed window. I mean, they're still vertical sliding sash windows. I think there has to be an element of responsibility to people living in a flat to make sure that children can't climb out of a window. But these windows would be no different to the existing in safety terms.
Of course, but nothing stops, is the parents, of course, responsibility to look after their children, but nothing stops us to improve what we already have. If there could be any features can be added, only children cannot open on their own, but still parents' requirements to, whatever feature that can be added to make sure that the children's safety for the future.
I think this is entering the council's responsibility as a building owner rather than town planning. I mean, it's not something that town planning can really deal with. But the building owner, who is obviously the Royal Borough, obviously does have responsibilities in that regard. I'm sure.
Could perhaps write an email to Doug Goldring or Kim Taylor-Smith.
That's the basic course of action.
Recommendations. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. We'll proceed to a decision. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Idris, in favour? Fantastic.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Wood, you're in favour. Councillor Ali?
In favour, Chair.
And Councillor Wade?
In favour.
In favour, and I'm in favour, so that passes unanimously. And that brings us to the end of tonight's proceedings. Thank you all very much for your time. It was a late one, but we got through it in the end.
Ebenezer can go home.